Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Claire Bennett, and I am 34 years old. This happened in July 2023. The Kansas heat was relentless as I pulled my Subaru into the small parking area at the base of Wilson Trail. I'd been looking forward to this solo hike for months, a chance to clear my head after finalizing my divorce from Mark. 3 days alone in the wilderness of Clinton State Park was exactly what my therapist had recommended. Time to process, reflect, and begin healing. I double-checked my pack one last time before shouldering it. Water, trail mix, first aid kit, tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, matches, compass, knife, flashlight, and extra batteries. My phone showed 4 bars, but I knew reception would be spotty once I ventured deeper into the woods. I'd downloaded offline maps of the area and left my itinerary with my sister Emma. Safety first, especially for a woman hiking alone. The trail began pleasantly enough. Tall oaks and maples provided welcome shade from the blistering summer sun. Birds chirped overhead, and occasionally I spotted a squirrel darting between trees. The familiar weight of my pack and the rhythm of my boots on the dirt path brought a sense of comfort I hadn't felt in months. About 2 miles in, I paused at a small clearing to check my map and take a drink of water. According to the park guide, I should reach the first designated camping area by early evening if I maintained a steady pace. As I studied the contour lines indicating the upcoming hills, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I turned, expecting to see another hiker or perhaps a deer, but the trail was empty. The woods had grown eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just a heavy, waiting silence. A shiver ran up my spine despite the heat. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. No response. I shook off the feeling of unease and continued walking, picking up my pace slightly. The divorce had left me jumpy and paranoid, I reasoned. This was supposed to be my recovery time, not another opportunity for anxiety to take hold. As afternoon stretched into evening, the trail began to climb. My calves burned with the effort, and sweat soaked through my moisture-wicking shirt. When I finally reached the ridge overlooking Slow Creek, I stopped to admire the view. The water reflected the golden light of the setting sun, and in the distance I could see the flat expanse of farmland that characterized much of eastern Kansas. According to my map, the camping area was just half a mile ahead. I'd make it before dark. Perfect. The designated site was a small clearing surrounded by dense woods. A crude stone fire ring had been constructed by previous campers, and a nearby tree had been carved with initials and dates, evidence of human presence that I found oddly reassuring. I set up my tent efficiently, gathered firewood, and soon had a small blaze going. As darkness fell, I heated a freeze-dried meal of pasta primavera and ate while watching the flames dance. The day's hike had exhausted me in the best possible way, leaving my muscles pleasantly tired and my mind quieter than it had been in months. After securing my food in a bear-resistant container and hanging it from a tree branch a good distance from my tent, I crawled into my sleeping bag. The night sounds of the forest, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, lulled me toward sleep. That's when I heard it. A whisper so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. "Claire!" My eyes snapped open. No one on this trail knew my name. I hadn't passed any other hikers all day. "Hello," I called out, my heart pounding. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me. Just the wind, I told myself, or my imagination. Get it together, Claire. I tried to settle back into my sleeping bag, but sleep eluded me. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves had me on edge. Around midnight, exhaustion finally won out, and I drifted into a fitful sleep filled with strange dreams. I woke to gray morning light filtering through my tent, Condensation had formed on the inside of the rainfly, and my sleeping bag felt damp. Outside, a light fog hung between the trees, giving the forest an otherworldly appearance. As I emerged from my tent, I noticed something odd. The fire pit, which I had carefully extinguished the night before, now contained fresh ashes, and arranged around it were 3 small stones in a perfect triangle. I approached cautiously. I hadn't arranged those stones, and the fire had definitely been out when I went to bed. Cold fear slithered down my spine. Someone had been in my camp while I slept. I scanned the surrounding woods, half expecting to see a figure watching me from between the trees, but there was only fog and silence. The usual morning chorus of birds was noticeably absent. My instinct was to pack up and head back to the trailhead immediately, but I hesitated. Maybe there was a rational explanation. Perhaps another hiker had wandered by in the early morning hours and reused my fire pit. It was weird that they hadn't made themselves known, but not necessarily threatening. I decided to continue with my original plan. The next stretch of trail would take me deeper into the woods, toward Woodridge Hollow, a remote valley that was supposed to be especially beautiful. If anything else strange happened, I could always turn back. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee, I broke camp and hit the trail again. The fog persisted, limiting visibility and muffling sound. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. By midday, the fog had mostly burned off, revealing a brilliant blue sky. The trail became more challenging, winding through rocky terrain and steep inclines. I welcomed the physical exertion as a distraction from my lingering unease. Around 2 in the afternoon, I reached a small stream. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones, and I paused to refill my water bottles. As I knelt by the stream, I caught a glimpse of movement reflected in the water. A dark figure standing on the bank behind me. I whirled around, nearly losing my balance. Nothing. Just trees and underbrush and the empty trail stretching back the way I'd come. "Get it together," I muttered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. The divorce had left me more traumatized than I'd realized. Mark had never been physically abusive, but his constant criticism and gaslighting had clearly taken a toll on my sense of reality. I pressed on, pushing myself harder than I should have. The trail began to descend into Woodridge Hollow, a steep path that zigzagged down the hillside. At one point, the trail narrowed alongside a sharp drop-off. I hugged the inner wall of rock, keeping my eyes fixed ahead. That's when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the trail about 50 yards ahead. The silhouette appeared to be that of a woman in a long dress, but something about the proportions seemed wrong. Her arms hung too low, her neck too long. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. The figure didn't move. I blinked hard, and when I looked again, the trail was empty. "Fuck," I whispered, pressing a hand to my chest to feel my pounding heart. Was I having some kind of breakdown? The stress of the divorce, the isolation of the trail, was it all catching up to me? By the time I reached the valley floor, my nerves were frayed. Woodridge Hollow was beautiful as promised. A lush, green valley with wildflowers dotting the meadow and a small, clear pond at its center. But I couldn't appreciate the scenery. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made me jump. I set up camp near the pond, where the open space would give me good visibility in all directions. There was another fire ring here, along with a crude wooden bench, signs that this was a popular camping spot, though I hadn't seen another soul all day. As I was unpacking my tent, I discovered something tucked into an outer pocket of my backpack, a small bundle of twigs tied together with what looked like human hair. I dropped it like it was on fire, then stood staring at it on the ground, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't put that there. Someone had been through my pack, either during the night or while I was on the trail. This wasn't just my imagination. Someone was following me, watching me, leaving these strange signs. I pulled out my phone. No signal, as expected. I could hike back the way I came, but that would mean hours on the trail, and I'd likely be caught out after dark. The smart play was to stay put for the night and make a quick exit in the morning. I gathered extra firewood, building a larger than necessary fire. Its warmth and light provided small comfort as the daylight faded. I kept my knife within easy reach and positioned myself so I could see as much of the surrounding area as possible. Night fell. The fire crackled, and I waited, wide-eyed and alert for any sign of movement in the darkness beyond my small circle of light. Around midnight, I heard singing. A woman's voice, distant but clear, singing a melody I didn't recognize in words I couldn't understand. I strained to locate the source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Who's there?" I shouted, brandishing my knife. "I know someone's following me. Show yourself." The singing stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of the fire and my own ragged breathing. Then, from across the pond, came a response. "Claire Bennett." My blood ran cold. The voice was female but wrong somehow, as if someone was struggling to make human sounds with a throat not designed for speech. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your pain," came the reply, closer now from the edge of the woods to my right. "Your fear, your grief." I scrambled to my feet, spinning in a circle, knife extended. "Stay back. I'm armed." A low laugh rippled through the darkness. "So am I." Movement caught my eye. A pale figure emerging from between the trees. In the flickering firelight, I saw a woman in a tattered white dress, her hair long and matted with leaves and twigs. But as she moved closer, I realized with growing horror that she wasn't walking. Her feet hovered inches above the ground, and her body swayed unnaturally like a puppet on strings. "Do you know what they called me when I was alive, Claire Bennett?" the figure asked, her head tilting at an impossible angle. "Agnes Woodridge. This was my land, my home, until they drowned me in that pond for practicing the old ways." I backed away, keeping the fire between us. "You're not real," I said, though my voice trembled with doubt. "You can't be real." "Am I not?" Agnes glided closer. "Then how do I know about Mark? How do I know about the pain he caused you? The nights you cried yourself to sleep? The way he made you doubt your own mind?" My breath caught in my throat. "How could you possibly know that?" Her smile widened too far, revealing teeth that were sharp and numerous. "I know because I taste your pain. It called to me, drew me to you." I backed up another step, nearly tripping over my backpack. "Stay away from me." "I can help you, Claire," Agnes continued, circling the fire. Her movements were fluid yet wrong, like watching film played at the wrong speed. "I can take your pain away, make you forget, or better yet." Her eyes gleamed in the firelight. "I can make Mark suffer as you suffered." A part of me, a dark, wounded part I'd tried to deny, felt a thrill at her words. Make Mark suffer. Make him feel the pain he'd inflicted on me. But some last shred of self-preservation warned me that whatever this thing was, accepting its help would cost far more than I was willing to pay. "No," I said firmly, finding strength in my refusal. "I don't want your help. I don't want revenge. I just want to be left alone." Agnes's face contorted, transforming from almost human to something ancient and terrible. "Then you will join me in the pond," she snarled, lunging forward with impossible speed. I reacted instinctively, swinging my knife in a wide arc. It passed through her form like she was made of smoke, and I stumbled off balance. Cold fingers grasped my wrist, burning like ice where they touched my skin. With a cry of pain and fear, I yanked free and ran. I had no plan beyond putting distance between myself and that thing. I plunged into the darkness of the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, Agnes's laughter echoed through the trees, seeming to come from all directions at once. "Run, little Claire, run from your pain. I'll be waiting when you tire." I ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled with exhaustion. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized I had no idea where I was. The trail was long gone. The moon provided just enough light to see shapes and shadows, but nothing familiar. I was lost in the woods with a vengeful spirit hunting me. "Think, Claire," I whispered to myself. "Think." Agnes had said she drowned in the pond. Water. Perhaps water was her domain, her source of power. I needed to get as far from the pond as possible, but which direction was that? In my panic, I'd lost all sense of orientation. I pulled out my phone. Still no signal, but I could use the compass app. The screen lit up, casting an eerie blue glow. Once I had my bearings, I decided to head west, away from Woodridge Hollow and toward higher ground. I walked for what felt like hours, using my phone's flashlight sparingly to conserve battery. Every sound, every shadow had me on edge. Twice I thought I glimpsed pale movement among the trees, and once I heard that same unearthly singing, faint but unmistakable. Just before dawn, I emerged from the forest onto a dirt road. Relief washed over me at this sign of civilization. According to my map, this had to be Old Miller Road, which eventually connected to the main highway. If I followed it, I'd reach safety. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I heard the rumble of an approaching vehicle. An old pickup truck rounded the bend, slowing as the driver spotted me standing at the roadside. The truck pulled to a stop, and an elderly man with weathered features rolled down his window. "You lost, miss?" he asked, eyeing my disheveled appearance with concern. "Yes," I admitted. "I was hiking in Clinton State Park and got turned around." He frowned. "Clinton's a good 10 miles from here. You've wandered onto private property, the old Woodridge estate." My blood ran cold. "Woodridge? As in Agnes Woodridge?" The old man's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that name?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I heard stories about a woman who drowned in a pond." He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "Best get in. Ain't safe out here for strangers who know too much about Agnes." Against my better judgment, but fearing the alternative more, I climbed into the passenger seat. The old man introduced himself as Harold Miller. "My family's owned land around here for generations," he explained as we bumped along the dirt road. "Known the stories of Agnes Woodridge my whole life." "Is she real?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did she really drown?" Harold kept his eyes on the road. Agnes was a healer. Some called her a witch, but folks still came to her when doctors couldn't help. Then the influenza hit in 1918. People died despite her remedies. Grief turned to anger. They blamed her for the deaths. "They drowned her in the pond," I finished. He nodded grimly. "Led by my great-grandfather, Thomas Miller. Family shame we live with to this day." We rode in silence for a while, the truck rattling over the uneven road. Then Harold spoke again, his voice low and urgent. "She marked you, didn't she? I can see it in your eyes. That haunted look." I touched my wrist where Agnes's fingers had burned my skin. A perfect handprint had formed, the skin red and blistered. "She said she was drawn to my pain," I admitted, "that she could help me or use me. I don't know." Harold's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "She feeds on pain and grief, uses it to grow stronger. Every few years, someone vulnerable wanders into her territory. Most don't make it out." "But I did," I said, though I wasn't sure if I truly had escaped. "For now," Harold replied ominously, "but she don't give up easy, not until she's taken what she wants." "Which is what? My pain? My life?" "Your soul, most likely. A vessel to finally leave that pond behind." We emerged onto the paved highway, and Harold accelerated. "I'm taking you to see my grandmother. She knows more about Agnes than anyone still living. If anyone can help you, it's her." 20 minutes later, we pulled up to a small farmhouse surrounded by fields of corn. An ancient-looking woman sat on the porch in a rocking chair, as if expecting us. "This is my grandmother, Esther Miller," Harold said as he helped me from the truck. "Grandma, this here's—" "Claire Bennett," Esther finished, her eyes, remarkably clear and sharp in her wrinkled face, fixed on me. "Agnes has been waiting for you for a long time." I froze. "You know who I am?" "I know Agnes's ways," Esther replied. "Come sit. We don't have much time." Once seated on the porch, Esther took my marked wrist in her gnarled hands, examining the handprint. "She's bound herself to you," Esther murmured. "Tasted your pain and found it to her liking. She won't stop until she has all of you." "How do I stop her?" I asked desperately. Esther's eyes met mine. "You have to give her what she really wants. Not your pain, not your soul, but justice. The Miller family owes a debt that's never been paid." Harold shifted uncomfortably beside me. "What kind of debt?" I asked. "Blood," Esther said simply. "Agnes was pregnant when they drowned her. 2 lives taken, not 1. The pond has held her ever since, but she's been gathering strength, waiting for someone like you, someone carrying enough pain to give her power, someone she could use to exact her revenge. On the Millers. But that was over 100 years ago." "Spirits don't reckon time like we do," Esther said, "and some debts don't fade with passing years." "So what am I supposed to do?" I demanded, fear giving way to frustration. "Sacrifice Harold to appease a vengeful ghost?" Esther's laugh was like dry leaves rustling. "No, child. The debt must be acknowledged, not paid in more blood. Thomas Miller never admitted his sin, never faced justice for leading that mob. His descendants have carried that burden of silence for generations." Harold hung his head. "We don't talk about Agnes. Family rule. Don't speak her name. Don't go near the pond. Don't acknowledge what our forefather did." "And that silence has been her prison," Esther concluded. "And now, her opportunity." I tried to process what they were telling me. "So, I'm what? A conduit, a tool for her revenge." "You're a bridge," Esther corrected, "between her world and ours, between past wrongs and present justice." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Esther explained what needed to be done. We would return to the pond at sunset, Harold, Esther, and I. There, Harold would formally acknowledge his ancestors' crime and ask Agnes's forgiveness. It wouldn't guarantee my safety, but it might satisfy Agnes enough to break her hold on me. I spent the day resting at the Miller farmhouse, trying to ignore the growing sensation of cold spreading from the handprint on my wrist. By late afternoon, the mark had expanded, pale tendrils of frost-like patterns extending up my arm toward my heart. "She's getting stronger," Esther observed. "We must hurry." The drive back to Woodridge Hollow was tense. Harold behind the wheel, Esther beside him, and me in the back, watching the landscape pass with growing dread. We parked where the dirt road ended and continued on foot, Esther leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. As we approached the pond, the air grew noticeably colder. The summer heat seemed unable to penetrate this place, and our breath fogged in front of our faces. "Agnes Woodridge," Harold called out, his voice shaking slightly, "we've come to speak with you." At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the surface of the pond began to ripple, though there was no wind. Water rose in a column at the center, twisting and shaping itself into a human form. The same spectral woman I'd encountered the night before. "Thomas Miller's blood returns," Agnes said, her voice like water flowing over stones. Her eyes found me. "And you brought my Claire back to me. How thoughtful." "I'm not yours," I said, though my voice trembled. Esther stepped forward, seemingly unafraid. "Agnes, you've waited long enough for justice. Harold has come to give you what you're owed." Agnes's watery form rippled with what might have been laughter. "Justice? Can he return my child to me? Can he give me back the life that was stolen? No, Harold said, dropping to his knees before the pond. I can't undo what was done to you, but I can acknowledge it. I can end the silence. He pulled a small book from his pocket, an old journal bound in cracked leather. This belonged to Thomas Miller, Harold explained. It contains his confession, written in private but never spoken aloud. He knew what he did was wrong. The guilt haunted him until his death. Harold opened the journal and began to read. May 4th, 1918. What we did to the Woodridge woman follows me like a shadow. I led them to her door. I denounced her as a witch. I stood by as they dragged her to the pond, heavy with child, begging for mercy. Not for herself, but for her unborn baby. We showed no mercy. God forgive me, I showed no mercy. As Harold read, the air grew even colder. The specter of Agnes hovered above the pond, her form becoming more solid, more human with each word. I've lived with this burden, Agnes, Harold concluded, closing the journal. My family has protected your story, even in our silence. We've kept your land undeveloped, your pond undisturbed. But we were wrong to hide from the truth. On behalf of Thomas Miller and all his descendants, I ask for your forgiveness. For a long moment, Agnes simply stared at Harold. Then her gaze shifted to me, and I felt the cold from my marked arm surge through my entire body. I gasped, dropping to my knees as frost crystals formed on my skin. Claire bears no guilt in this, Esther intervened. Release her. She's given you what you wanted. Acknowledgement. Justice. Agnes drifted closer to me, her waterlogged face inches from mine. She carries such exquisite pain, she whispered. Pain I recognize. Pain I once felt. Please, I managed to say through chattering teeth. I just want to go home. Something changed in Agnes's expression. A softening, a flicker of the woman she might once have been. Home, she repeated. I've been so long without a home. She reached out one dripping hand and touched my cheek. Unlike before, her touch wasn't cold, but warm, like sunshine on water. Your mark, she said softly. He broke something in you, as they broke something in me. You came to these woods to heal. Perhaps we both need healing. The frost receded from my skin, the pain ebbing away. Agnes turned to Harold, who still knelt by the pond's edge. I accept your acknowledgement, son of Thomas, she said, but justice is not complete. Harold tensed. My bones still lie in this pond, Agnes continued, my child's bones with them. Find them, bury them properly. Mark the grave with my name so I am not forgotten again. Harold nodded solemnly. I will, Agnes. I swear it. Agnes's form began to dissipate, water returning to water. But before she fully vanished, she spoke to me one last time. Heal, Claire Bennett. Carry your pain not as a burden, but as proof that you survived. That is how you honor your own story. Then she was gone, the pond once again still and unremarkable in the fading light. Esther helped me to my feet. The handprint on my wrist had faded to a faint scar, one that would remain with me always, a reminder of my encounter with Agnes Woodridge. We made our way back to Harold's truck in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As we drove away from Woodridge Hollow, I watched the land through the rear window until it disappeared from view. 3 months later, I received a letter from Harold Miller. It contained a newspaper clipping from the local paper. Historic injustice acknowledged. Remains of Agnes Woodridge and unborn child laid to rest. The article detailed how Harold had worked with local authorities to recover Agnes's remains from the pond and provide her with a proper burial in the Miller family cemetery. The grave marker read simply, Agnes Woodridge and child. Remembered at last. I traced my fingers over the scar on my wrist. It no longer pained me, though sometimes in my dreams I still heard Agnes singing. Not a threat now, but a reminder. A reminder that pain can bind us to the past or push us toward healing. The choice, as Agnes had finally realized, is ours to make. I never returned to Wilson Trail or Woodridge Hollow, but I did continue hiking, facing my fears, embracing my solitude, finding strength in the journey. And sometimes when I'm alone in the woods and the light filters through the trees, just so, I whisper a quiet thank you to Agnes for showing me that surviving pain is its own kind of magic. My name is Rebecca Winters, and I am 29 years old. This happened in September 2024. I never should have gone to Clinton Lake alone. Everyone warned me, my sister, my co-workers, even the old man at the gas station just outside Lawrence who squinted at my hiking boots and backpack with obvious concern. But I was desperate to prove something to myself after the divorce, to show that I could face the wilderness on my own terms. 3 days of solitude in the remote corners of Clinton State Park, where the trails wind through forest so dense the sunlight fractures into eerie patterns on the ground. That was my plan. Getting awful late in the season for solo camping, the gas station attendant had warned, his weathered hands tightening around my change, especially out by Southwind Trail. Strange sounds out there lately. I'd smiled politely, dismissing his concern as local superstition, the kind people in small Kansas towns indulge in when they have nothing better to do. I should have listened. My ex-husband, Daniel, would have rolled his eyes at me. Always trying to prove something, he'd say. Maybe he was right. Maybe this whole trip was just me acting out like a rebellious teenager instead of dealing with my pain properly. But after the divorce papers were signed and he moved in with his assistant, the one he swore was just a friend, I needed something drastic, something that would force me back into my own body, my own life. The first day went exactly as I'd hoped. The weather was perfect, cool but sunny, with just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. I hiked 8 miles along the northwestern shore of Clinton Lake, taking photos of red-tailed hawks and the occasional white-tailed deer. The wooded areas surrounding the lake were a riot of early autumn colors. By late afternoon, I'd found a small clearing near a rocky outcrop overlooking the water, protected from the wind and hidden enough to feel private. As I set up my tent, I felt that little surge of triumph that comes from building something with your own hands. Daniel had always handled the outdoorsy stuff on our previous camping trips. He'd make a big show of hammering in stakes and adjusting guy lines while I handled cooking and organization. But here I was, doing it all on my own. The tent wasn't perfect. One side sagged a bit, but it was mine. Night fell quickly, as it tends to do in early autumn. I'd built a small fire and was heating a surprisingly decent freeze-dried pasta dinner when I first heard it. A shuffling sound from the darkness beyond my campsite, followed by the crack of a twig. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly small against the vastness of the forest. No answer, just the soft whisper of wind through leaves. Probably a deer, I told myself, but I found myself scanning the tree line, my headlamp's beam cutting through the darkness in jerky, nervous movements. I'd always prided myself on not being afraid of the dark, another point of contention with Daniel, who insisted on a nightlight even in our 30s, but something about being truly alone made the darkness feel like a physical presence, pressing against the bubble of light from my campfire. I finished my dinner quickly, and though I'd planned to sit by the fire and write in my journal, I suddenly felt too exposed. I retreated to my tent earlier than planned, zipping the door closed with a finality that felt childish even to me, as if a thin layer of nylon could protect me from whatever lurked in the woods. I fell asleep to the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore and the distant call of an owl. I woke to silence. Complete, absolute silence. Anyone who's spent time in the wilderness knows this isn't normal. Nature is never silent. There are always insects buzzing, leaves rustling, animals moving through underbrush. But as I lay in my sleeping bag, eyes wide open in the pre-dawn darkness, I couldn't hear anything, not even the wind. And then I heard breathing. Not my own, This was deeper, slower, with a slight rasp at the end of each exhale. It seemed to come from just outside my tent, near the door. My body went rigid with fear. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer again, curious about the strange fabric structure in its territory. But something about the regularity of it, the human-like pattern, made my skin crawl. The breathing continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, just as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the tent fabric, it stopped. I heard footsteps, definitely human footsteps, moving away from my tent and into the forest. I waited until full daylight before unzipping the tent, half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. The campsite looked exactly as I'd left it. No footprints, no signs of disturbance. But my hiking boots, which I'd left neatly paired outside the tent door, were now arranged in a straight line, pointing directly toward the densest part of the forest. A prank, I decided. Some local teenagers had spotted a woman camping alone and decided to mess with me. I'd be more careful tonight, make sure my bear spray was within reach. I made myself coffee on my portable stove, trying to shake off the unease as the familiar routine grounded me. The day ahead was meant to be my most ambitious, a 10-mile loop around the lake's southern peninsula to a place locals called Carpenter's Bluff, an outcropping with views of the entire lake. The hike started well enough. The trail was clearly marked and the movement warmed my body, burning away the lingering fear from the morning. I took photos of interesting fungi and flowering plants, carefully consulting my field guide to identify each one. It was all so normal, so mundane, that I began to think I'd overreacted to what was probably just a curious raccoon. Around midday, I reached a fork in the trail not marked on my map. The left path continued along the lakeshore, while the right climbed steeply into denser forest. My map showed only one continuous trail in this area, but the right-hand path looked well-traveled. Figuring it was a shortcut used by locals, I decided to take it, confident that it would reconnect with the main trail eventually. This was my first real mistake. The forest grew denser as I climbed, the trees closer together, their canopies blocking out most of the sunlight. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the air took on a damp, earthy smell that reminded me of a cellar. Still, the path was clear, winding between massive oak and hickory trees that must have been hundreds of years old. After about an hour, I should have reached the bluff according to my calculations. Instead, the path continued to climb. I checked my phone's GPS, but the signal was non-existent. The paper map showed nothing remotely like the terrain I was traversing. Just a little farther, I told myself. The view will be worth it. Another hour passed, and the path finally leveled out. I emerged into a small clearing dominated by an enormous dead oak tree. Its massive trunk was split down the middle as if struck by lightning, and the remaining branches reached toward the sky like blackened fingers. The sight of it made me deeply uneasy, but it was the object hanging from one of those branches that made my blood run cold. A small bundle of sticks tied together with what looked like red thread, dangling and slowly rotating in a breeze I couldn't feel. My first thought was of Blair Witch, that old movie that had terrified me as a teenager. I almost laughed at myself for being scared of what was obviously another prank, probably by the same people who'd moved my boots. But then I saw the carvings on the tree trunk. Crude symbols cut deep into the wood, some of them weeping a dark substance that couldn't possibly be sap. And at the base of the tree was a small pile of bones, small enough to be from rabbits or squirrels, but unmistakably arranged in a pattern. I backed away slowly, suddenly aware of how far I was from any marked trail, from any other people. The clearing, which had seemed merely odd a moment before, now felt charged with malevolence. I turned to retrace my steps, moving quickly without running, trying to maintain my composure. I made it about 50 yards back down the path when I heard it, that same deep, rasping breathing from outside my tent, now coming from somewhere in the trees to my right. I froze, my eyes scanning the underbrush. Nothing moved, but the breathing continued, slightly faster now, as if excited. "Who's there?" I called, trying to sound authoritative rather than terrified. This isn't funny." The breathing stopped abruptly. Then came a voice, a woman's voice, thin and wavering with an accent I couldn't place. "Rebecca," it said, drawing out the syllables. "Pretty Rebecca, so far from home." My name. It knew my name. I ran. Dignity and composure forgotten, I sprinted back down the path, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear movement in the forest paralleling my course. Something large crashing through the underbrush, moving impossibly fast. I don't know how long I ran. Long enough that my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. When the path finally opened up to the lakeshore again, I nearly sobbed with relief. I staggered to the water's edge and collapsed, gulping air and fighting the urge to vomit. When I finally caught my breath and looked around, I realized I had no idea where I was. The lake stretched before me, but the shoreline was different. Rockier, with steeper banks than where I'd started. The sun was lower in the sky than it should have been. Somehow, hours had passed. My watch confirmed it, 4:37 p.m. I'd left camp around 8:30 that morning, but the detour should have added 2 hours at most to my hike. Somehow, I'd lost nearly 6 hours. I pulled out my phone again, praying for signal. 1 bar, enough to load my GPS app, which showed me I was on the opposite side of the lake from my campsite, almost 5 miles from where I should have been. The app showed no trail connecting my current location to where I'd started my detour. According to the digital map, I'd walked straight through untrailed forest for miles, which was impossible. I'd stayed on the path the entire time. I had 2 options: try to make it back to my campsite before dark, or find a suitable place to spend the night where I was. Given the fading light and my exhaustion, I reluctantly chose the latter. I found a small beach area, mercifully open and exposed rather than enclosed by trees, and set up my emergency bivy sack, a lightweight waterproof sleeping bag I'd brought for emergencies. As twilight deepened into night, I sat on the rocky beach, a small fire my only comfort. I kept my headlamp on and my bear spray in hand, scanning the tree line every few minutes. Nothing approached, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every sound, the lap of water against the shore, the rustle of night animals, sent adrenaline coursing through my system. I kept the fire going until dawn, feeding it with shaking hands. When morning finally came, I packed up quickly and consulted my GPS again. The most direct route back to my campsite was along the shoreline, which would be slower going than a trail but impossible to lose. I estimated it would take me about 3 hours. The morning was gray and chilly, with mist rising off the lake's surface. The beauty would have been haunting under different circumstances. Now it just felt ominous. I'd been walking for about an hour when I found the doll. It was sitting on a boulder near the water's edge, a crude thing made of twigs and grass, bound with the same red thread I'd seen in the clearing. It had no face, just a smooth knob of wood where a head would be. But most disturbing of all, tangled in its twisted limbs was a strand of hair. Blonde hair, like mine. I stared at it, unable to move. And this wasn't local teenagers playing pranks. This was something else entirely. A sound behind me made me whirl around, a branch snapping in the forest. I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure ducking behind a tree, too tall and thin to be human, its limbs at odd angles. I ran again, abandoning my careful progress along the shore in favor of speed. The rocky beach gave way to mud that sucked at my boots, slowing me down, but I pushed forward, blind panic giving me strength I didn't know I had. I must have covered another mile before my body forced me to stop, my lungs heaving painfully. I looked back. Nothing was following me that I could see. The shoreline stretched empty behind me. When I turned forward again, she was there. An old woman standing in my path not 20 feet away. She wore what looked like homespun clothing, a dress of rough gray fabric that reached her ankles. Her white hair hung in matted strings around a face so lined and weathered it barely looked human. But it was her eyes that made me stumble backward in horror. completely black, without whites or pupils, like holes punched through her face. "You shouldn't be here, Rebecca Winters," she said, her voice the same one I'd heard in the forest. "These are old grounds, sacred grounds." "How do you know my name?" I managed to ask, my voice a terrified whisper. She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "The lake tells me many things, shows me visitors before they arrive." She took a step toward me. "Shows me what they fear most." I raised my bear spray, pointing it at her with a trembling hand. "Stay back. I don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to get back to my campsite." "Your campsite," she repeated, the words like a mockery. "Your little tent and your little fire, as if they could keep you safe." Another step closer. "Nothing keeps you safe from the witch of Clinton Lake." The local legend. I'd read about it online while researching camping locations. The story of an old woman accused of witchcraft by settlers in the 1800s, drowned in the lake with rocks tied to her ankles. It was just a story parents told children to keep them from swimming alone, a bit of fabricated folklore to entertain tourists. Except here she was, solid as the ground beneath my feet, and radiating a malevolence that made the air around her seem darker. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to buy time as my mind raced for a way out. "Company," she said simply. "It gets lonely, decade after decade. I find someone every few years, someone who wanders off the trail." Her black eyes glittered. "Someone no one will miss." No one will miss. The words hit me like a slap. Was that true? Would Daniel even notice if I never returned? Would my sister, busy with her own life and family, realize something was wrong before it was too late? The witch seemed to read my thoughts. "Yes," she hissed. "You understand. You're already half ghost, Rebecca. Let me show you the rest of the way." She lunged forward with impossible speed. I squeezed the trigger on the bear spray, unleashing a cloud of burning chemicals directly into her face. She screamed, a sound no human throat could make, high and piercing like metal tearing. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted past her, running parallel to the shoreline, pushing my exhausted body to its limit. Behind me, the screaming transformed into rage-filled words in a language I didn't recognize, the sound carrying over the water with unnatural clarity. I ran until the screaming faded, until my vision began to blur at the edges from exhaustion. When I finally slowed, I found myself approaching a more developed part of the shoreline. Through the trees, I could make out what looked like a park area. Picnic tables, a boat ramp, civilization. I staggered toward it, hope giving me a final burst of energy. As I emerged from the tree line, I saw a young family setting up for a picnic lunch, a man, a woman, and 2 small children. The sight of them, so normal, so impossibly, wonderfully ordinary, made tears spring to my eyes. "Excuse me," I called, my voice hoarse. "Can you help me? I got lost hiking." They turned to look at me, and I suddenly realized what a sight I must be. Clothes torn and muddy, face scratched from branches, eyes wild with fear and exhaustion. The man stepped protectively in front of his family. "Are you okay? Do you need medical help?" I wanted to tell them everything, about the witch, the doll, the breathing outside my tent, but looking at their concerned, skeptical faces, I knew how it would sound. "I just got turned around on the trails," I said instead. "Can you tell me how to get back to the North Shore campgrounds?" They gave me directions. I was closer than I'd thought, less than a mile away, and offered me water and a granola bar, which I accepted gratefully. The woman wanted to call a ranger, but I assured her I could make it on my own. I didn't want to answer questions I couldn't explain. I made it back to my campsite by early afternoon. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Tent still standing, gear untouched. It felt surreal, as if the past 24 hours had happened to someone else. My rational mind tried to make sense of it all. I'd gotten lost, yes. Dehydration and fear had caused hallucinations. The witch was just a homeless woman living in the park, playing tricks on hikers. The doll was part of her delusion. But as I packed up my gear, determined to leave immediately despite my exhaustion, I found something in my tent that shattered these comfortable explanations. A small bundle of sticks tied with red thread, placed neatly on my pillow, and wrapped around it a single strand of white hair. I left everything, the tent, the sleeping bag, all of it. I grabbed only my car keys and phone, abandoning hundreds of dollars of equipment as I ran for the parking lot. I drove straight home without stopping, hands shaking on the steering wheel, checking the rearview mirror obsessively. It was only when I was inside my apartment, doors locked and lights blazing, that I allowed myself to break down. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it had all been some kind of breakdown, grief over my divorce manifesting as paranoid delusions. I even saw a therapist who nodded sympathetically and prescribed anti-anxiety medication. But I know what I saw. I know what found me at Clinton Lake. 2 weeks after my return, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a crude doll made of twigs and grass bound with red thread. It had a face this time. A small photograph of mine, cut from my driver's license. I moved the next day. Left Kansas entirely. I live in Arizona now, as far from lakes and forests as I can get. I don't hike anymore. I don't camp. I stay where there are people and light and concrete beneath my feet. But sometimes, in the deepest part of night, I still hear that breathing outside my window. Deep, slow, with a slight rasp at the end of each exhale. And I know that distance doesn't matter. That some things, once they find you, never let go. They say the witch of Clinton Lake claims a victim every 7 years. It's been 6 since she found me. Sometimes I wonder who she's watching now, what lonely, broken person is being drawn to her shores. And I wonder if, next September, she'll finally finish what she started with me. My name is Marcus Dunn, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October 2024. The first sign that something was wrong should have been the crows. Dozens of them, circling the forest canopy above us at Clinton State Park, their normally chaotic patterns unnaturally synchronized. I pointed them out to Aiden, but he just laughed. "City boy scared of some birds?" he teased, adjusting his oversized backpack. "Come on, Mark. This weekend is about reconnecting with nature, remember?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, you're right." But the birds continued to bother me as we hiked deeper into the woods, following the North Shore Trail that wound around Clinton Lake. This camping trip had been Aiden's idea, a way to blow off steam after months of grueling overtime at the architecture firm where we both worked. 3 days in the Kansas wilderness, just the two of us and whatever we could carry on our backs. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. Kansas wasn't known for its wilderness, but Clinton State Park had surprisingly dense forests on its northern shores, with hiking trails that local guides insisted rivaled more famous destinations. The sun filtered through the yellow and orange canopy, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. It would have been beautiful if not for the nagging sense of unease I couldn't shake. "How much farther to this secret spot of yours?" I asked, checking my phone. No service, as expected. Aiden consulted his paper map. He'd insisted on going old school for this trip. "About 2 more miles. Trust me, it'll be worth it. My dad used to take me there when I was a kid. Nobody knows about it except locals." I nodded, trying to match his enthusiasm. Unlike Aiden, who'd grown up in rural Kansas, I was a transplant from Chicago. The outdoors had never been my natural habitat, but I'd agreed to this trip because, frankly, I needed the break. The past year had been rough. My divorce finalized in January, my mother's cancer diagnosis in March. Work had become my escape, which explained why Aiden and I had bonded so quickly after he joined the firm. We were both hiding in our careers. The trail narrowed as we continued, eventually becoming little more than a game path. The trees grew denser, older, their trunks wider and more gnarled. I checked my watch, 3:47 p.m. We had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. Does this trail have a name?" I asked, stepping over a fallen log covered in bright orange fungi. "Locals call it Skinwalker Path," Aiden replied without turning around. "That's ominous." He laughed. "Just an old Shawnee legend. Nothing to worry about." "What legend?" Aiden paused, turning to face me. His expression was serious for a moment before breaking into a mischievous grin. "They say there's something in these woods that can wear your face. The Shawnee believed certain witches could transform into animals by wearing their skins, but the really dangerous ones could take human form." I rolled my eyes. "Is this your attempt at telling a campfire story before we even set up camp?" "Just setting the mood," he chuckled. "Come on, we're almost there." We hiked in silence for another half hour before the path opened into a small clearing next to a creek that fed into Clinton Lake. The spot was admittedly perfect, sheltered by towering oak and hickory trees, with a natural stone fire pit that suggested others had camped here before, though not recently. "Home sweet home," Aiden announced, dropping his pack. "What did I tell you? Perfect, right?" I had to agree. "Not bad. Kansas. Not bad at all." We set up camp efficiently, working together to pitch our tents on opposite sides of the fire pit. As I hammered in the last stake, I noticed something strange: a small pile of stones arranged in a circle about 20 yards from our campsite. "Hey, Aiden," I called out. "What do you make of this?" He walked over, frowning slightly. "Huh. Wasn't here last time I came." "Looks deliberate," I said, crouching down. The stones formed a perfect circle about 3 feet in diameter. In the center lay what appeared to be the remains of a small animal. Bones picked clean, arranged in a pattern that was definitely not natural. "Probably just kids messing around," Aiden said, but he sounded uncertain. "Let's leave it alone." As the sun began to set, we got a fire going and prepared a simple dinner of canned stew heated over the flames. The forest grew quiet around us. Too quiet, I realized. No birdsong, no insects chirping. Just the crackle of our fire and the soft babbling of the creek. "So," Aiden said, breaking the silence, "tell me about Jennifer. You never talk about what happened." I stiffened at the mention of my ex-wife's name. "Not much to tell. We wanted different things." 3 years of marriage and that's all you have to say?" I poked at the fire, watching sparks rise into the darkening sky. "She wanted kids. I didn't. Or, more accurately, I wasn't ready. She got tired of waiting." That wasn't the whole truth, of course. The real issues had run deeper: my workaholic tendencies, her growing resentment, the slow death of intimacy. By the end, we were strangers sharing a house, with nothing left but politeness and regret. Aiden nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. Sorry to bring it up." "It's fine," I said, even though it wasn't. "What about you? Ever been close to settling down?" "Once," he admitted. "College girlfriend. Thought she was the one until I caught her with my roommate." "Ouch. Ancient history now." He glanced up suddenly, his eyes fixed on something over my shoulder. "Did you see that?" I turned. "See what?" "Thought I saw a light between the trees, like a flashlight." We both fell silent, listening. The woods remained unnaturally quiet. "Probably nothing," Aiden finally said. "Eyes playing tricks." But as the night deepened, strange things continued to happen. Our fire, built properly and well fed with dry wood, kept dying down to embers for no apparent reason. Twice I heard what sounded like footsteps circling our campsite, but when I shined my flashlight into the darkness, nothing was there. Aiden claimed not to hear anything. At around 11 p.m., we decided to turn in. My tent felt suddenly flimsy protection against the oppressive darkness of the forest. "Hey," Aiden called from his tent, "try not to get eaten by skinwalkers." "Very funny," I called back, trying to sound amused rather than unsettled. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, my dreams were chaotic. Fragmented images of Jennifer standing in our old kitchen, her back to me, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When I called her name, she turned, but her face was blank. Literally, a smooth expanse of skin with no features. I woke with a start, heart pounding. The inside of my tent was pitch black. Checking my watch, I saw it was 3:17 a.m., the dead of night. Something had woken me, but I couldn't identify what until I heard it again, a voice softly calling my name. Marcus. It came from outside, somewhere in the darkness beyond my tent. It wasn't Aiden's voice. It was higher, softer, almost feminine. Marcus, help me. My blood ran cold. It sounded like Jennifer, but that was impossible. She was back in Chicago, hundreds of miles away. Please, Marcus, I'm hurt. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling. This couldn't be happening. It was a dream or a hallucination. It had to be. With the flashlight clutched in my white-knuckled grip, I slowly unzipped my tent. The night air hit me like a physical force, cold and damp. My light barely penetrated the thick darkness surrounding our campsite. Aiden? I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. Are you hearing this? No response. His tent, just 20 feet away, remained dark and still. Marcus? The voice came again, closer now. This way. Against every instinct screaming for me to stay put, I stepped out of my tent. The ground felt unnaturally cold beneath my feet. The campfire had died completely, not even embers remaining in the stone circle. I swept my flashlight across the clearing. Everything looked normal. Aiden's tent, our backpacks hung from a tree branch to deter animals, the creek gurgling softly nearby. And yet something felt profoundly wrong, as if reality itself had shifted slightly out of alignment. Aiden, I called again, louder this time. Wake up, man. No response. Steeling myself, I approached his tent. Aiden, there's something weird going on. When he still didn't answer, I unzipped his tent flap, pointing my flashlight inside. Empty. The sleeping bag was there, neatly arranged, but Aiden was gone. Ice formed in my veins. Aiden, I shouted, panic rising. This isn't funny. Marcus. The voice, Jennifer's voice, came from the direction of the creek. Please hurry. Every rational part of my brain told me to stay put, to wait for daylight. But what if Aiden was in trouble? What if he'd gone to investigate the voice himself? Cursing under my breath, I grabbed my jacket and slipped on my hiking boots. The flashlight beam trembled as I made my way toward the creek, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to move independently of the trees creating them. Hello? I called, approaching the water's edge. Who's there? The creek looked different at night, darker, deeper. The water reflected my flashlight beam, sending distorted light patterns across the surrounding trees. And there, on the opposite bank, stood a figure. My light caught only glimpses. Pale skin, long dark hair, a white nightgown soaked at the hem. It looked exactly like Jennifer, down to the slight tilt of her head when she was concerned about something. Jennifer? My voice cracked. How are you here? The figure didn't respond, just stood motionless, partially obscured by low-hanging branches. Where's Aiden? I demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite my mounting terror. What did you do with him? Slowly, the figure raised an arm, pointing downstream. Then it retreated into the trees, vanishing from sight. Wait, I called, splashing across the shallow creek without thinking. The water was shockingly cold, instantly soaking my boots and the bottom of my jeans. By the time I reached the other side, the figure was gone. But there was a path of sorts, a narrow trail leading away from the creek and deeper into the forest. Without my conscious decision, my feet began to follow it. The woods grew denser, the trees more ancient and twisted. My flashlight beam seemed to diminish with every step, the darkness pressing in from all sides. The trail led uphill, away from the creek and out of the small valley where we'd camped. After what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, I emerged onto a small ridge overlooking another, larger clearing. What I saw there stopped me cold. In the center of the clearing stood a cabin. Old, dilapidated, its wooden walls gray with age. A faint light flickered from within, visible through a single grimy window. Around the cabin, arranged in concentric circles, were more of those stone formations we'd found near our campsite, dozens of them. I knew with absolute certainty that this place wasn't on any trail map. It felt wrong, like a tumor in the otherwise healthy forest. "Aiden?" I called out, my voice sounding pathetically small in the vast darkness. The cabin door creaked open. Everything in me screamed to run, to flee back to the campsite and wait for dawn. But what if Aiden was in there? I couldn't abandon him. Step by reluctant step, I approached the cabin. The stones seemed to watch me as I passed between their circles, their arrangements more complex than the simple ring we'd found earlier. Some contained bones, others held bundles of dried plants or feathers. The air smelled strange, like burnt hair and copper. The door stood partially open, a sliver of yellowish light spilling onto the ground outside. I could hear movement within, a shuffle of feet, the creak of floorboards. "Hello?" I called out, standing just outside. "Aiden, are you in there?" "Come in, Marcus," came the reply, but it wasn't Aiden's voice. It wasn't Jennifer's either. It was something else entirely, something that made my skin crawl with its wrongness. It sounded like multiple voices layered together, speaking in perfect unison. I should have run. Everything in me knew that. But instead, I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The cabin's interior was a single room, illuminated by a dozen candles placed on every available surface. The walls were covered with strange symbols painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with a pungent smell that made my head swim. In the center of the room stood a figure with its back to me. It wore Aiden's clothes, had Aiden's build and hair. But when it turned, I knew immediately it wasn't him. The face was wrong. It looked like a poorly fitted mask, with Aiden's features stretched too tight across the skull beneath. The eyes were the worst part, totally black, without whites or pupils, like holes punched into reality. "Do you like this form?" it asked in that terrible multi-layered voice. "I borrowed it from your friend. He didn't need it anymore." My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. What are you?" The thing wearing Aiden's face smiled, the expression stretching its skin unnaturally. The Shawnee had many names for me. The settlers who came later called me the Hollow Man, but names have power, so I keep my true one to myself. "Where's Aiden?" I managed to ask, though I feared I already knew the answer. "Here," it said, tapping Aiden's chest. "And there." It gestured to a dark corner of the cabin. My flashlight beam followed the movement, revealing a sight that turned my blood to ice. Aiden's body, slumped against the wall, his chest a gaping cavity, emptied of organs. His face bore an expression of absolute terror, frozen in his final moments. I retched, doubling over and emptying my stomach onto the cabin floor. "Such fragile vessels you humans are," the thing said, studying Aiden's hands as if seeing them for the first time. "But useful. I've worn many skins over the centuries, but I find human ones allow me to walk among you most effectively." My mind raced, seeking some rational explanation, some way to deny the horror before me. "This isn't real," I gasped. "I'm dreaming. I have to be dreaming." "Your kind always says that," it chuckled, the sound like stones grinding together. "It's easier than accepting the truth, that your understanding of reality is incomplete." It took a step toward me. I scrambled backward, colliding with the open door. "Don't be afraid, Marcus," it said, its voice shifting, becoming a perfect imitation of Jennifer's. "I'm not going to kill you, not yet." "What do you want?" I asked, desperately searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "Company," it said simply. "These woods have been lonely since the Shawnee were driven out. Occasionally, hikers and campers wander into my territory, but they rarely stay long. Because you kill them. It wasn't a question. Only when necessary. Some I simply redirect, plant false memories, send them home with nightmares they can never quite remember upon waking. It smiled again with Aiden's stretched face. But you're different, Marcus. You have a hole inside you already. I felt it the moment you entered my forest. A perfect hollow space carved by loss. To my horror, I realized it was talking about my divorce, about the emptiness I'd been carrying since Jennifer left. Somehow, this thing had reached into my mind and found my most private pain. Your friend came looking for you. It continued conversationally, gesturing to Aiden's corpse. When you were talking to what you thought was your former mate by the creek, he was brave, I'll give him that. He actually managed to wound me before I took his skin. I glanced at the corpse again, forcing myself to look past the horrific chest wound. There was a hunting knife clutched in Aiden's right hand, its blade dark with what might have been blood. But you, it continued, you're already half empty inside. It would be so easy to slip in alongside what remains, to share your vessel rather than replace it entirely. We could go back to your city together, find more lonely souls to feed upon. The thing that wasn't Aiden moved closer, and I caught a glimpse of something shifting beneath its stolen skin. Something dark and formless, pressing against Aiden's features from within. My hand closed around something heavy leaning against the wall. An old iron poker. Without thinking, I swung it with all my strength. The poker connected with the thing's head with a sickening crunch. Aiden's face split along an invisible seam, black ichor spraying from the wound. The creature howled, a sound no human throat could produce, high and piercing enough to make my ears ring. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, bursting out of the cabin and into the night forest. Behind me, the creature's inhuman screams continued, accompanied by a wet, slithering sound that suggested it was abandoning Aiden's damaged body. I ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, tripping over exposed roots. My flashlight beam bounced wildly, creating a strobe-like effect that made the forest seem to move around me. I had no idea which direction led back to the campsite. I only knew I had to put distance between myself and that cabin. A root caught my foot, sending me tumbling down a steep embankment. Pain shot through my ankle as I landed awkwardly at the bottom. Somewhere in the fall, I'd lost my flashlight. I was now in complete darkness, injured, and hopelessly lost. Forcing myself to remain silent despite the pain, I listened for signs of pursuit. The forest had come alive with sounds. Rustling leaves, cracking branches, and underneath it all, a soft, wet, sliding noise growing steadily closer. I crawled beneath a fallen log, making myself as small as possible. My ankle throbbed, almost certainly sprained if not broken. Without a light, without a weapon, my only hope was to hide until dawn. If dawn ever came in this nightmare forest. Time passed with excruciating slowness. Every sound made me flinch, expecting to see that grotesque parody of Aiden's face peering at me from the darkness. My mind kept returning to his body in the cabin, to the emptiness where his organs should have been. Had he been alive when the creature hollowed him out? Had he felt everything? A soft rustling directly above me froze my blood. Something was on top of the log I was hiding beneath. Something heavy that made the dead wood creak. "I can smell your fear, Marcus," came Jennifer's voice, so close it might have been whispering directly into my ear. "It's delicious." I bit down on my hand to keep from screaming. Above me, the log shifted as whatever was perched atop it moved. "This game is growing tiresome," the voice continued, now a blend of Jennifer's and Aiden's tones, layered atop each other in a nauseating harmony. "Your body will give out eventually. The cold, the injury, the shock. Humans are so fragile." I pressed myself flat against the forest floor, hardly daring to breathe. A dark liquid began to drip through the cracks in the log above me, the same black ichor I'd seen when I struck the creature. It landed on my cheek, burning like acid where it touched my skin. "I'll make you a final offer, Marcus," the thing said. "Surrender willingly, and I'll make it painless. I'll even let you keep small pieces of yourself, enough to remember who you were, which is more than most get." The log above me began to splinter, hairline cracks appearing in the rotted wood. Whatever form the creature had taken now, it was strong enough to tear through solid timber with its bare hands. In desperation, I fumbled through my jacket pockets, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon. My fingers closed around my cigarette lighter, a cheap plastic thing I carried more out of habit than use, having quit smoking years ago. The log continued to crack. Through the widening gaps, I caught glimpses of something huge and shapeless, its edges shifting and flowing like oil on water. It had abandoned any pretense of humanity now. With trembling hands, I flicked the lighter. A small flame appeared, pathetically inadequate against the horror above me. But it was fire, the most primal weapon humans had against the darkness. The effect was immediate and unexpected. The creature recoiled from the tiny flame with a shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The pressure on the log vanished as it retreated. Fire. It feared fire. Our campfire had kept dying without explanation. The cabin had been lit with candles, not a proper hearth. How had I missed such an obvious weakness? Holding the lighter before me like a talisman, I crawled out from my hiding place. The small flame cast just enough light to see a few feet ahead, enough to avoid obstacles, but not enough to orient myself in the forest. My ankle screamed in protest as I put weight on it, but adrenaline helped me push through the pain. I needed to find my way back to the campsite, to gather supplies and somehow survive until daylight. The lighter wouldn't last forever, its fuel was limited. I picked a direction and started limping as quickly as my injured ankle would allow, constantly checking over my shoulder for signs of pursuit. The flame wavered with each step, threatening to extinguish and leave me in darkness again. After what felt like an eternity of painful progress, I spotted a familiar landmark. The creek. Relief flooded through me. If I could follow it upstream, I should eventually reach our campsite. The night had grown colder, my breath visible in the faint light of the flame. The pain in my ankle had settled into a persistent throb that spiked whenever I put weight on it. But the creek offered hope. A path back to safety, however tenuous. I had just begun following the water's edge when I heard it. The distinctive sound of something large moving through water. Upstream, in the direction of our camp. The lighter's flame reflected off the creek's surface, creating dancing patterns that initially obscured what was approaching. Then I saw it. A dark shape, larger than a human, moving with a fluid grace that suggested it wasn't confined by a solid form. It was between me and the campsite. I froze, caught in an impossible dilemma. Going back meant returning to the vicinity of the cabin. Going forward meant confronting the creature. Crossing the creek might help, but in the darkness, I couldn't tell how deep the water was, and my injured ankle would make swimming difficult if not impossible. The shape in the water stopped moving. For a long, terrible moment, we regarded each other across the darkness, predator and prey, locked in a primitive standoff older than humanity itself. Such persistence, it called out, its voice now a cacophony of stolen sounds. Most would have given up by now. The lighter was growing hot in my hand, the fuel running low. I needed a more sustainable source of fire. "What are you?" I called back, playing for time as I examined my surroundings. "Why are you here?" Questions, it replied. "Always the same ones. What I am doesn't translate into your primitive language. Why I'm here? Because this is where I've always been. Long before your kind built cities and forgot the dark. Before you convinced yourselves you were masters of this world rather than temporary guests." As it spoke, I spotted what I needed. A fallen branch nearby, its end wrapped in dead leaves and twigs. If I could ignite it, I'd have a torch. "And Aiden?" I asked, slowly inching toward the branch. "Why him? Why me?" Opportunity, hunger. The shape in the water began moving again, drifting closer. Your friend entered my forest willingly. You were simply convenient. My fingers closed around the branch. With my eyes still fixed on the approaching shape, I touched the lighter's flame to the bundle of dry leaves at its end. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the leaves caught, flaring to life and illuminating a much wider area around me. What I saw in that expanded circle of light nearly stopped my heart. The creature had no definite shape anymore. It was a writhing mass of darkness, vaguely humanoid but constantly shifting and flowing. Worse, I could see faces within it, dozens of them, pressing against its surface like people drowning in black oil. Some I recognized. Aiden, what looked like Jennifer, though it couldn't possibly be her, and others, strangers with expressions frozen in eternal agony. The torch's larger flame seemed to cause it physical pain. It retreated from the light, a high, keening sound emanating from its formless mass. "Fire cleanses," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "That's what you're afraid of, isn't it? That's why our campfire kept dying. You were putting it out." The thing retreated further, sliding partially back into the creek. The faces within it contorted in shared agony. "You can't escape," it hissed. "You don't know these woods. They're mine. The darkness is mine. Your light will fail eventually, and I'll be waiting." It was right. My improvised torch would burn out in minutes, not hours. Dawn was still far away, but the creature's obvious fear of fire gave me an idea. "Your cabin," I said. "It's full of candles and dried plants. Very flammable, I'd imagine." The reaction was immediate and violent. The mass of darkness surged toward me, shrieking in multiple voices. I thrust the torch forward and it recoiled just as quickly. "Stay back," I shouted, waving the flaming branch before me. "Or I swear I'll burn your entire forest down." It was a bluff. Starting a forest fire would be as dangerous to me as to the creature. But it didn't know that, and the threat alone was enough to give it pause. In that moment of hesitation, I made my choice. I couldn't go backward or forward, but there was another option. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I hurled myself across the creek, directly through the place where the creature hovered above the water. It was like passing through ice-cold oil, a sensation so horrifically wrong that my mind recoiled from the memory even as it was happening. For a split second, I felt the press of those trapped souls against my skin, heard their voiceless screaming in my mind. Then I was through, sprawling on the opposite bank, my clothes soaked and smoking faintly where the creature's essence had touched them. The torch, miraculously, was still lit. Behind me, the thing roared in fury. I didn't look back. With renewed purpose, I began limping through the forest, away from the creek, away from the trail, in what I hoped was the direction of the cabin. If I couldn't escape, I could at least deprive this monster of its sanctuary. And if I was lucky, very lucky, the fire might drive it away long enough for me to find my way back to civilization. The forest seemed to conspire against me. Branches reaching to scratch my face, roots rising to trip my feet. But the torch kept me safe, carving a bubble of light through the oppressive darkness. Twice I caught glimpses of the creature stalking me at the edge of the light's reach, but it didn't approach. Eventually, I found myself on familiar ground. The ridge came into view, and beyond it, the clearing with the cabin. The stone circles gleamed faintly in the torchlight like hundreds of watching eyes. The creature's presence pressed against the edge of my awareness. A malevolent hunger circling just beyond the reach of my failing torch. It knew what I intended, yet it couldn't approach while I held the fire. Moving as quickly as my injured ankle would allow, I made my way to the cabin. The door still stood open, the candlelight within spilling out into the clearing. To my horror, Aiden's body was gone from where I'd last seen it. Only a dark stain on the floor remained. I didn't have time to dwell on what that might mean. The torch was burning dangerously low, the flame consuming the last of the leaves and small twigs. Soon it would reach the wood itself, which would burn much slower and give less light. Inside the cabin, I worked quickly. I gathered the candles, placing them strategically against the dry wooden walls. I pulled down the bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters and piled them in the center of the room. Anything that would burn, I added to the growing pile. Outside, I could feel the creature's rage building like a physical pressure against my skin. The air grew colder, the darkness more absolute beyond my dwindling circle of torchlight. When everything was prepared, I stood in the doorway of the cabin, torch held high. "This ends now," I called into the darkness. "Whatever you are, whatever you've done, it stops here." The forest erupted with inhuman screaming. Not just one voice, but dozens. The collective agony of all the souls the thing had consumed over who knew how many years. I touched the torch to the pile of herbs and other combustibles in the center of the cabin. They caught immediately, the fire spreading faster than I'd anticipated. The walls, ancient and dry, began to smoke almost instantly. As the cabin caught fire, something extraordinary happened. The stone circles in the clearing began to glow with an inner light. Not the orange of flames, but a cold blue illumination that seemed to come from within the rocks themselves. The creature materialized fully at the edge of the clearing, a roiling mass of darkness studded with half-formed human faces and limbs. It convulsed in what appeared to be extreme pain as the blue light from the stones intensified. "You don't understand what you've done," it said, its voice now a dying whisper. "The stones. They weren't to keep you out. They were to keep me in." The realization hit me with horrible clarity. The stone circles weren't the creature's creation. They were a prison, crafted long ago to contain it within this small portion of forest. A prison I had just destroyed. The cabin was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the night sky. The stone circles glowed brighter still, their light pulsing in an accelerating rhythm. Within that cold blue illumination, the creature writhed and distorted, its shape collapsing in upon itself. With a sound like thunder directly overhead, the stones shattered simultaneously. The shockwave knocked me to the ground, the breath driven from my lungs. When I looked up, the creature was gone. The cabin continued to burn, but the oppressive sense of wrongness that had permeated the forest had vanished. Had I destroyed it? Or merely freed it? I didn't wait to find out. Using a burning piece of cabin timber as a makeshift torch, I began making my way back toward our campsite. The forest felt different now. Ordinary, just trees and darkness, no longer charged with malevolent awareness. I found the campsite just before dawn, my ankles swollen to twice its normal size and my body on the verge of collapse. Aiden's tent remained empty. Mine was exactly as I'd left it, my sleeping bag still rumpled from when I'd awoken to that voice in the night. As the first light of morning filtered through the trees, I gathered what supplies I could carry and began the long, painful journey back toward the park entrance and civilization. I didn't know what I would tell people about Aiden's disappearance. The truth would sound like the ravings of a madman. That was 6 months ago. I've since moved away from Kansas, found a new job, tried to rebuild my life, but I know two things with absolute certainty. First, whatever was in those woods is still out there, no longer bound to that small clearing but free to roam. And second, it knows my face, my voice, my innermost pain. Someday, when I'm at my most vulnerable, I'll look up to find someone I love standing before me. Jennifer, perhaps, or my mother, or even Aiden. They'll smile at me with stretched, ill-fitting faces and ask me to let them in. And God help me, I don't know if I'll be strong enough to refuse. My name is Nathan Reeves, and I am 34 years old. This happened in June 2024. The endless Kansas sky stretched above me as I drove along the dusty road toward the Cimarron National Grassland. My border collie, Scout, had his head hanging out the passenger window, tongue lolling in the warm summer breeze. After 2 years of working non-stop at the architectural firm in Kansas City, I desperately needed this solo camping trip to clear my head. "Just you and me for the next week, buddy," I said, reaching over to scratch behind Scout's ears. He leaned into my touch, his tail thumping against the seat. The divorce papers had been finalized 3 months ago, but the emptiness in my chest hadn't subsided. Angela had moved on quickly, too quickly, while I was still picking up the pieces. This trip was supposed to help me find myself again. The GPS on my phone directed me to turn onto a narrow dirt road. As I followed the winding path deeper into the grasslands, tall bluestem and switchgrass swayed hypnotically on either side. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, transforming the prairie into a sea of gold. Despite Kansas's reputation for being flat, this southwestern corner of the state had surprising diversity: rolling hills, rock formations, and deep ravines carved by ancient rivers. I'd chosen the Cimarron National Grassland for its isolation. Over 108,000 acres of prairie wilderness, and according to the rangers, the remote eastern section where I was headed saw fewer than a dozen visitors a month. Perfect. After another 40 minutes of driving, I reached the trailhead for Point of Rocks, a notable landmark along the historic Santa Fe Trail. From there, I planned to hike about 5 miles to a secluded camping area near the Cimarron River. According to my research, there was a lesser-known spot where an underground spring created a small oasis in the otherwise dry terrain. I parked my truck, grabbed my backpack, and clipped Scout's leash to his collar. "Ready for an adventure?" I asked. He barked excitedly, already pulling toward the trail. The hike was peaceful. Meadowlarks sang from hidden perches in the grass, and a red-tailed hawk circled lazily overhead. The trail was overgrown in places, confirming that few people ventured this far into the grassland. I checked my phone occasionally, marking our progress on the offline map I'd downloaded. Cell service had disappeared about 20 minutes after I'd left the main road. We reached the campsite as the sun began to dip below the horizon. It was even more beautiful than I'd hoped. A small clearing near a bend in the Cimarron River, with a natural spring bubbling up from the ground and forming a small pool before running off toward the larger waterway. Cottonwood trees provided shade and a natural windbreak, while the surrounding tall grass created a sense of seclusion. I set up my tent, inflated my sleeping pad, and organized my gear. Scout watched attentively, occasionally wandering to the edge of the clearing to sniff at interesting scents. As darkness fell, I built a small fire and heated up a freeze-dried meal. The stars appeared one by one until the night sky was awash with more points of light than I'd seen in years. "This is it, Scout," I said, leaning back in my camp chair. "Peace and quiet." That first night passed uneventfully. I slept better than I had in months, with Scout curled up at my feet inside the tent. The sound of the river and the gentle rustling of grass lulled me into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke to birdsong and the warm glow of sunrise filtering through the tent fabric. After a quick breakfast of instant coffee and oatmeal, Scout and I set out to explore the area. I wanted to hike to an unusual rock formation I'd read about online, described as Kansas's hidden mini Badlands, an outcropping of eroded limestone that created an otherworldly landscape amid the prairie. According to my map, it was about 3 miles from our campsite. We followed a game trail that ran roughly parallel to the river, then cut inland through a section of denser vegetation. Scout was in his element, nose to the ground, occasionally flushing out rabbits or ground-nesting birds. The morning was pleasantly warm, but as we walked, I noticed the temperature seemed to drop. Not dramatically, but enough that I found myself zipping up my light jacket. Strange for June in Kansas. Even stranger was how the birdsong that had been constant suddenly ceased. The silence was absolute, save for our footsteps and Scout's panting. "You notice that?" I asked Scout, who had slowed his pace and was walking closer to my legs than usual. His ears were perked forward, alert to something I couldn't perceive. The rock formation appeared ahead of us, rising from the prairie like the spine of some massive buried creature, weathered limestone in shades of tan and pale yellow, carved by millennia of wind and rain into fantastic shapes. As we approached, I felt a sense of unease creep over me. Something about the formation seemed wrong somehow. The angles too precise in places, the holes and crevices arranged in patterns that whispered of intention rather than natural erosion. Trypophobia. That's what they call the fear of clusters of holes or irregular patterns. I'd never experienced it before, but looking at certain sections of the rock made my skin crawl. Scout refused to go closer, planting his feet and whining softly when I tried to lead him toward the formation. "Okay, buddy, we'll keep our distance," I said, relieved to have an excuse not to approach any closer. Instead, I took a few photos with my phone and noted our location. We'd circle around the formation and continue exploring in another direction. As we walked away, I glanced back over my shoulder. For a split second, I could have sworn one of the larger holes in the rock face shifted, widening like a pupil dilating in darkness. I blinked, and it was just a hole again. A trick of the light, nothing more. We spent the rest of the day exploring, discovering a beautiful hidden waterfall where a tributary joined the Cimarron River, and a meadow filled with wildflowers. By late afternoon, we'd made a wide loop and were heading back toward our campsite. The sun was still a few hours from setting, but dark clouds had begun gathering on the horizon. "Looks like we might get some rain tonight," I told Scout as we picked up our pace. The forecast had predicted clear weather for the entire week, but out here, things could change quickly. We were about a mile from camp when Scout suddenly stopped, his whole body rigid with attention. A low growl rumbled in his chest and the fur along his spine stood on end. I froze, scanning our surroundings but seeing nothing unusual, just prairie grass swaying in the increasing wind. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, unclipping his leash in case we needed to move quickly. He took a few steps forward, still growling, his gaze fixed on a point in the grass about 50 yards ahead. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound. Not quite footsteps, more like something being dragged across the ground. Scout's growl intensified, and I felt my heart rate spike. I reached into my pocket for my folding knife, flicking it open with a soft click. "Hello?" I called out. "Someone there?" The dragging sound stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse somehow. Then the grass ahead parted, and a figure emerged. It was an old woman, so ancient and withered that she seemed more like a walking corpse than a living person. Her skin was the color of tanned leather, deeply lined and spotted with age. She wore what looked like handmade clothing, a patchwork dress of faded fabrics and a shawl wrapped around her bony shoulders. Her white hair hung in thin strands around her face, partially obscuring eyes that seemed too bright to alert in that time-ravaged countenance. "Hello there," she called, her voice surprisingly strong. "Don't often see folks out this way." Scout continued to growl, backing up against my legs. I placed a reassuring hand on his head, though I shared his unease. "Just doing some camping and hiking," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. "Is this your land?" The old woman smiled, revealing teeth that were too perfect, too white for someone of her apparent age. "Not mine, no, but I know every inch of it." She took a step closer, and Scout's growl deepened. "Your dog doesn't seem to like me much." "He's just protective," I said, though I'd never seen Scout react this way to anyone before. He wasn't an aggressive dog by nature. "We should be getting back to our camp before that storm hits." "Storm?" The woman glanced at the dark clouds, then back at me with an unsettling smile. "Oh, I wouldn't worry about that. Those clouds, they're just passing through. Won't drop a single raindrop on these grasslands." She tilted her head slightly. "Where exactly are you camping?" Warning bells rang in my mind. "Just somewhere along the river," I said vaguely. "Well, we should be going. Nice meeting you." I began backing away, keeping my eyes on the woman. She made no move to follow but called after me. "The Cimarron's beautiful this time of year, isn't it? Especially near that little spring, the one with the cottonwoods." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told her where I was camping, and that spot wasn't marked on any maps I'd seen. It was a local secret I'd learned about from an obscure hiking forum. "Be careful out there, Nathan," she added. "These grasslands, they have a way of swallowing people up sometimes." I hadn't told her my name either. I turned and walked quickly away, Scout staying close to my side. When I looked back after about 100 yards, the old woman was gone. The grass stood undisturbed, as if she'd never been there at all. By the time we reached our campsite, my rational mind had begun making excuses. She must have overheard my name somehow. Maybe she'd seen me setting up camp yesterday and was just a local eccentric who liked to spook tourists. The perfect teeth could be dentures. There were reasonable explanations for everything. Just as the old woman had predicted, the storm clouds passed overhead without releasing a drop of rain, though the wind picked up considerably, making the tall grass around our clearing wave like the surface of an ocean. I added extra stakes to my tent just to be safe. As night fell, I built another fire, larger than the previous nights. Scout refused to leave my side, sitting alert with his ears constantly swiveling toward the darkened prairie beyond our circle of firelight. I tried to focus on cooking dinner but found myself jumping at every sound: the crack of a burning log, the hoot of a distant owl, the rustle of grass in the wind. "We're fine," I told Scout, though I was really reassuring myself. Just an odd day. I checked my phone, hoping for a weather update, or maybe to send a quick text to my brother, letting him know everything was okay. No service, as expected, but what caught my attention was the battery level. It had been at 82% when we returned to camp, and I hadn't used it since. Now it read 31%. As I stared at the screen, it dropped to 30%, then 29% before my eyes. I quickly shut it off, unnerved. Electronics sometimes behaved strangely in remote areas, I told myself. Searching for a signal could drain the battery. Still, I made a mental note to be conservative with my phone use. I had a portable charger, but it would only provide a couple of full charges. After dinner, I sat by the fire trying to relax with a paperback I'd brought along. Scout lay at my feet but remained vigilant, occasionally raising his head to stare into the darkness. The flames of my campfire flickered oddly at times, shifting from orange to an almost greenish hue before returning to normal. A trick of the light, or perhaps some mineral in the wood I'd gathered. Around midnight, I banked the fire and retreated to my tent. Scout followed me inside, but rather than settling at my feet as usual, he positioned himself by the tent entrance, facing the zippered door. I slipped into my sleeping bag, exhaustion finally overcoming my unease. I woke suddenly in the darkness, heart pounding. Scout was standing rigid, a continuous low growl emanating from his throat. Outside the tent, something moved, slow, deliberate footsteps circling our campsite. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. For several long seconds, nothing but silence. Then a voice, the old woman from earlier, but somehow different, deeper, resonating in a way that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my skull. "Nathan," she called, drawing out my name. "Why don't you come out? The night is so beautiful." Scout's growl intensified. I fumbled for my flashlight and knife. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What do you want?" A soft laugh, like dry leaves scraping across stone. "Names have power, Nathan Reeves. You gave me yours so freely. I've been called many things over the centuries. The settlers who passed through here on the Santa Fe Trail called me La Bruja de la Pradera, the Witch of the Prairie. All the indigenous people had older names for me, names your tongue couldn't pronounce." My mind raced, trying to make sense of her words. This had to be some kind of prank or the ramblings of a mentally ill person. There was no way this woman was some centuries-old witch. "I'm armed," I lied, grateful that Scout's growling lent credibility to my threat. "Leave us alone, or I'll call the Rangers." Another bluff, with no cell service and miles from any help. "Oh, Nathan," she sighed, her voice impossibly close to the tent wall now. "Your pet knows what I am, even if you don't. Animals are so much wiser than humans in some ways." Scout lunged at the tent wall, barking furiously. I heard a startled step backward, then that awful laugh again. "Keep your distance from the rocks, Nathan," she said. "They're hungry this time of year, but then again, so am I." The footsteps receded, fading into the ambient sounds of the night. Scout continued to growl for several minutes before finally settling down, though he remained alert at the tent entrance. I sat awake for hours, knife in hand, jumping at every sound until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the tent fabric. When I finally gathered the courage to unzip the tent and peer outside, everything looked normal. The campfire had burned down to ashes, and the morning dew sparkled on the grass. No footprints surrounded our tent, despite the soft ground that should have held impressions. Scout dashed out, sniffing intently around the perimeter of our campsite before looking back at me with what I swear was confusion. Whatever, or whoever, had been here last night had left no trace. I built a small morning fire with shaking hands and made coffee, trying to decide what to do. The rational part of my brain argued that I'd experienced nothing more than an encounter with a local eccentric, followed by a vivid nightmare brought on by stress and an unfamiliar environment. But a deeper instinct, the same primal warning system that had kept our ancestors alive in wilderness far more dangerous than this, screamed at me to pack up and leave immediately. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My backpack, which I'd left leaning against a cottonwood tree the night before, was now hanging from a low branch. I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't placed it there. I approached it cautiously, Scout at my heels. The backpack looked undisturbed, but when I took it down and opened it, I discovered all my food was missing. Not just opened or scattered, completely gone. The granola bars, freeze-dried meals, trail mix, even the sealed package of beef jerky, all vanished without a trace. The rest of my gear remained untouched. My hands trembled as I zipped the pack closed. Someone had been in our camp while we slept, or worse, while I was awake and paralyzed with fear in my tent. But how had they managed to take my food without leaving footprints? And how had Scout, with his keen senses, not detected them until they were right outside the tent? "We're leaving," I told Scout, who wagged his tail in apparent agreement. "Right now." I packed up camp in record time, collapsing the tent and stuffing it haphazardly into its sack, not bothering with the usual neat folding. I had enough water to make it back to the trailhead, and my truck had emergency supplies including food. We could be back to civilization in a few hours. As I shouldered my now lighter backpack and clipped Scout's leash, I took one last look at our campsite. The spring bubbled innocently, catching the morning light. It was hard to reconcile the beauty of this place with the creeping dread that now filled me. We set off at a brisk pace, following the same trail we'd used to hike in. I decided to take the most direct route back to the trailhead, which would lead us past the rock formation we'd seen yesterday. In daylight, with our exit close at hand, it didn't seem as threatening. That was my first mistake. The morning was unusually still. No birdsong, no insect buzz, not even the whisper of wind through the grass. Just the sound of our footsteps and Scout's panting. The sun shone brightly, but it felt distant somehow, its warmth not quite reaching us. As we approached the rock formation, Scout began to hang back, pulling against his leash. I tugged him gently forward. "Come on, buddy. We'll go wide around it if it bothers you, but we need to keep moving." He reluctantly followed, staying close to my legs as we veered off the trail to give the rocks a wide berth. As we passed, I couldn't help glancing toward the formation. In the morning light, the holes and crevices that had unsettled me yesterday seemed even more deliberate in their arrangement, forming patterns that almost resembled faces frozen in expressions of agony. I quickened our pace, eager to put distance between us and the rocks. That's when I noticed the silence had deepened even further. The entire grassland seemed to be holding its breath. Scout stopped suddenly, his body going rigid. Before I could react, he let out a high-pitched yelp of pain and collapsed to the ground, writhing as if in the grip of a seizure. "Scout!" I dropped to my knees beside him, hands hovering helplessly over his convulsing body. His eyes rolled back, showing the whites, and foam flecked his muzzle. "Scout, what's wrong? What's happening?" A shadow fell across us, though there were no clouds in the sky and no trees nearby to cast it. The air temperature plummeted, my breath suddenly visible in front of my face despite the June morning. "He hears them calling," said a familiar voice behind me. "Poor creature. The animal mind is so vulnerable to their whispers." I whirled around to see the old woman standing a few yards away. In daylight, she looked both more and less human. Her proportions slightly wrong, arms too long, neck at an angle that should have been impossible to maintain. "What did you do to him?" I demanded, cradling Scout's head as his seizure began to subside. The woman tilted her head, that same unnatural angle. "I did nothing. The rocks did, or rather, what lives in them." She gestured toward the formation. "They're hungry, as I told you. Your dog heard them calling. You're fortunate your human ears are deaf to it, though not for much longer, I think." Scout had gone still now, his breathing shallow but steady. I gathered him into my arms, surprised at how light he felt despite being a 40-pound dog. "What are you talking about? What lives in the rocks?" "Something old," she replied. "Something that was here long before the grass grew, before the river carved its path. Something that sleeps most of the time but wakes when it hungers." She took a step closer and I instinctively backed away. The Kanza people avoided this place. The settlers who didn't disappeared. Every few decades, it stirs and I help it feed. My mind raced, trying to process her words while looking for an escape route. The woman stood between us and the path back to the trailhead. I could try to circle around her, but with Scout in my arms, I wouldn't be able to move quickly. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, trying to buy time as I slowly shifted position. She smiled, those two perfect teeth gleaming. "Because you're going to feed it, Nathan Reeves. You and your loyal companion. But first, you're going to run. They enjoy the chase, you see. The fear seasons the meat." She stepped aside, clearing the path. "Go on, run back to your truck. See how far you get." Every instinct told me not to turn my back on her, but with Scout still unconscious in my arms, I had little choice. I backed away slowly, then turned and began walking as quickly as I could manage with my burden. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel her eyes on me, that impossible smile widening in anticipation. Once I judged I was far enough away, I broke into a jog, Scout's weight growing heavier with each step. The trail seemed different somehow, wider in places, narrower in others. The landmarks I'd noted on our way in shifted or missing entirely. The sun had risen high overhead, but instead of warming, the air continued to chill. After what felt like an hour of increasingly desperate jogging, I had to stop to catch my breath. I gently laid Scout on the ground, relieved to see he was breathing more normally now, though still unconscious. I checked my phone to get our bearings, but it was dead. Battery completely drained despite being turned off. "Okay," I panted, talking to myself to stay calm. "Okay. The trail follows the river most of the way. If we just keep the river on our right, we'll reach the trailhead eventually." I looked around for the Cimarron River, which should have been visible through the grass to our right. There was nothing but prairie in all directions. Somehow, we'd wandered away from both the trail and the river. Panic bubbled up in my chest. I was a competent outdoorsman. I'd done backcountry hiking before. Getting lost like this shouldn't have been possible, especially in terrain as relatively open as these grasslands. Scout whimpered and stirred. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found my face. "Hey, buddy," I said, relief washing through me. "You had me worried there." He struggled to his feet, shaky but determined. When he looked at me again, something had changed. His eyes seemed different, still Scout's warm brown, but with something else looking out through them, something ancient and cold. "Scout?" I whispered, a new fear gripping me. He stared at me for a long moment, head tilted at that same unnatural angle I'd seen in the old woman. Then he turned and began walking purposefully through the grass, stopping after a few yards to look back at me expectantly. I hesitated. This wasn't Scout's normal behavior, not by a long shot. But he seemed to know where he was going, and I was thoroughly lost. With no better option, I followed. Scout led me through the grassland with unwavering confidence, changing direction occasionally but always moving with purpose. After about 20 minutes, I spotted a landmark I recognized, a distinctive dead tree that we'd passed on our hike in. We were back on track, or at least closer to it. Hope sparked in my chest. Maybe Scout had simply recovered and was leading us back the way we'd come, guided by his superior sense of smell and direction. Maybe the strange look in his eyes had been nothing more than a lingering effect of whatever seizure or fit had struck him. Another 10 minutes of walking brought us to the Cimarron River. Scout paused at the bank, looking across to the far side, then back at me. The river wasn't particularly wide or deep here, maybe 30 feet across and knee-high at most. We'd crossed at a similar point on our way in. "Good boy," I said, though something still felt off about his behavior. "Let's cross and find the trail." We waded across, the cool water a momentary relief from the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to hang over the grassland. On the other side, Scout shook himself dry, then continued, leading with that same eerie purposefulness. The landscape began to look familiar again. I recognized a bend in the river, a cluster of cottonwood trees, a rocky outcropping. We were definitely heading back toward the trailhead, though Scout was taking us on a route slightly different from the one we'd used coming in. That's when I noticed we were gradually curving back toward the rock formation. "No, Scout," I said firmly, stopping in my tracks. "Not that way." He turned to look at me, and for an instant, I could have sworn his eyes were not his own. The warm brown replaced by something darker, with a vertical pupil like a cat's. Then he blinked, and they were normal again. Scout whined and pawed at the ground, clearly wanting me to follow. I stood my ground. "No, we go this way." I pointed in what I believed was the direction of the trailhead, deliberately away from the rocks. He barked, a sound unlike any I'd heard him make before, deeper, reverberating in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. When I still didn't move, he turned and began walking toward the rock formation. "Scout," I called. "Come." He ignored me completely, continuing on his chosen path. I had no choice but to follow, afraid of losing him in the tall grass. As we walked, the air grew colder, and that oppressive silence returned, broken only by our footsteps and my increasingly labored breathing. The rock formation appeared on the horizon, looking larger and more ominous than before. The holes and crevices I'd found so disturbing now seemed to shift and pulse, as if breathing. Scout picked up his pace, trotting eagerly toward the rocks. "Scout, stop!" I shouted, breaking into a run to catch up with him. He reached the base of the formation before I could stop him. Without hesitation, he approached one of the larger openings, a crevice about 3 feet high that seemed to lead into darkness. He turned back once, those not quite right eyes fixing on me, then slipped inside. "Scout!" I screamed, reaching the rock seconds too late. I dropped to my knees at the crevice, peering into the darkness. "Scout, come back." My voice echoed strangely, suggesting a much larger space inside than should have been possible. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on, and shone it into the opening. The beam revealed a tunnel that extended far beyond what the external dimensions of the rock should have allowed, its walls unnaturally smooth and lined with the same hole patterns that had triggered my trypophobia earlier. From deep within, I heard Scout bark, a normal sound this time, with a note of fear that spurred me to action. I'd come too far and been through too much to abandon him now. Taking a deep breath, I squeezed through the crevice and into the tunnel. The temperature dropped immediately, my breath fogging in front of my face. The flashlight beam seemed dimmer inside, barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. The tunnel widened after a few yards, allowing me to stand upright. The walls glistened with moisture, and the hole patterns were more pronounced here. perfectly circular openings of various sizes that seemed to follow me with unseen eyes. A faint scuttling sound came from within some of them, like thousands of tiny legs moving in concert. "Scout!" I called, my voice muffled in the strange acoustics of the tunnel. "Where are you, boy?" A bark echoed from somewhere ahead, followed by a whimper. I moved forward cautiously, playing my flashlight over the walls, floor, and ceiling. The tunnel continued to widen until I found myself in a chamber roughly the size of my living room back in Kansas City. Multiple smaller tunnels branched off from it in all directions. Scout stood in the center of the chamber, his posture rigid, facing one of the larger tunnel entrances. As I approached him, he growled, not at me, but at whatever lay beyond in the darkness. "Good boy," I whispered, placing a hand on his back. His fur was standing on end, and a continuous tremor ran through his body. Whatever had possessed him to enter this place seemed to have passed, replaced by the natural fear of a dog in an unnatural environment. "Let's get out of here." I turned to retrace our steps, but froze as my flashlight beam caught movement at the tunnel entrance we'd come through. Something was blocking our exit, a shape that seemed to shift and flow like smoke but had substance. As I watched in horror, it coalesced into a vaguely humanoid form and stepped into the chamber. The old woman, or what I had perceived as an old woman, had changed. Her body had elongated, limbs now jointed in too many places, fingers stretching into talon-like appendages. Her face retained the general shape of humanity, but her eyes had grown larger, darker, with those same vertical pupils I thought I'd glimpsed in Scout's eyes. Her mouth, when it opened in a grotesque parody of her earlier smile, contained not the perfect white teeth I'd seen before, but rows of needle-like protrusions. "Nathan Reeves," she said, her voice no longer just sound but something I felt in my bones and organs. "You've brought yourself to us, just as I knew you would." Scout pressed against my legs, his growl continuous now. I backed away slowly, drawing him with me toward one of the other tunnel entrances. "What are you?" I asked, playing for time as I tried to formulate some plan of escape. The creature tilted its head at that impossible angle. "I am hunger," it replied simply. "I am what waits in the spaces between your world and others. I am what feeds when the barriers grow thin." It took a step toward us. I retreated further, Scout keeping pace with me. "The rocks," I said, pieces clicking into place in my mind. "They're not really rocks." "Are they?" "They're some kind of entrance." "Very good," it purred. "Not just an entrance, a living thing of sorts, ancient beyond your comprehension. It sleeps most of the time, dreaming its strange dreams. But every few decades, when the stars align just so, it wakes and hungers. And I am its voice, its hands, its lure." Another step forward, another step back. We were nearly at the mouth of one of the other tunnels now. "Others have come before you," it continued. "Lost hikers, curious explorers, lonely souls seeking solitude in these grasslands. They feed the rocks and the rocks feed me in turn. A symbiosis, you might call it." A sudden realization hit me. The missing food from my backpack, that was you? It made a sound like bones grinding together. A laugh, I realized with revulsion. A sample, a taste. Human food does little for me, but I was curious about what sustains you. Your fear, though, that will nourish me for months. In one fluid motion it crossed the chamber, moving with impossible speed. Before I could react, it was directly in front of me, those elongated fingers caressing my cheek with the gentleness of a lover. Its touch burned like frostbite. "Run now," it whispered, its fetid breath washing over my face. "The hunt makes the feeding sweeter." Scout snapped at the creature, his jaws closing on nothing as it flowed backward like smoke, reforming several yards away. I didn't wait for another invitation. I grabbed Scout's collar and plunged into the nearest tunnel, running blindly into the darkness. The tunnel twisted and turned, branching again and again. I chose directions at random, concerned only with putting distance between us and the creature. Scout ran at my side, somehow able to see in the near-total darkness despite my flashlight's failing beam. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we emerged into another chamber, smaller than the first but with a ceiling that rose out of the reach of my light. A faint luminescence came from fungus-like growths on the walls, casting everything in a sickly green glow. In the center of the chamber stood what at first appeared to be a statue, a human figure frozen in a posture of terror, arms raised as if to ward off some attack. As I approached, the horrible truth became clear. It wasn't a statue. It was a desiccated human corpse, perfectly preserved, the skin drawn tight over the bones like leather, the mouth open in an eternal scream. Against my better judgment, I moved closer. The corpse wore the tattered remains of what had once been hiking gear: boots, cargo pants, a fleece jacket now reduced to rags. Around its neck hung a camera on a strap, and on its wrist a watch that had stopped at 3:17. I raised my flashlight to its face and recoiled in shock. Despite the mummified features, there was something familiar about it. The bone structure, the remnants of a beard, the general build. It could have been me. A sound like sand shifting across stone drew my attention back to the tunnel entrance. The creature flowed into the chamber, now more smoke than solid, its form rippling and changing as it moved. "Do you like it?" it asked, gesturing toward the corpse. "He came here last year, another soul seeking escape from pain. His wife had died, I believe. Cancer. He was so lost, so empty already. Hardly worth the effort of hunting, but the rocks were hungry." My mind reeled. Angela hadn't died. She'd left me for her yoga instructor. But the parallel was too close for comfort. This thing knew how to find people when they were vulnerable, knew how to lure them in with their own pain and loneliness. "The resemblance is uncanny, isn't it?" the creature continued, circling the chamber. "Not a coincidence, of course. The rocks shape themselves to mirror what might have been, what might still be." Scout growled beside me, hackles raised as he tracked the creature's movement. I gripped my knife tightly, though I knew it would provide little protection against whatever this thing truly was. "We're leaving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And you're going to let us go." The creature's form rippled, a sound like distant laughter emanating from it. "Am I? And why would I do that when you've delivered yourself so conveniently to our table?" I backed toward what appeared to be another tunnel entrance, opposite from where the creature had entered. "Because I'm not alone," I bluffed. "I told people where I was going. Rangers know I'm here. If I don't check in soon, they'll come looking." "Lies," it hissed, its form solidifying slightly. "You told no one. You came to be alone with your grief, your abandonment. You wanted to disappear, Nathan Reeves. Part of you still does." It was right, and that realization sent ice through my veins. I hadn't told anyone exactly where I was going, just that I was camping somewhere in southwestern Kansas. Even my brother only knew I'd be gone for a week. No one would miss me for days, maybe a week or more. "Scout," I whispered, "stay close." I lunged toward the tunnel entrance, Scout matching my movement perfectly. The creature made no attempt to stop us, merely watching with those impossible eyes as we plunged into another dark passageway. This tunnel was different, narrower, with a downward slope that had me sliding more than running. The walls were slick with moisture, and that same fungal growth provided just enough light to see the outline of the passage. Behind us, I heard nothing, but that was somehow worse than the sound of pursuit. It knew these tunnels. It could be anywhere, waiting. We emerged into a larger space, though not a proper chamber like before. More like a widening of the tunnel into a natural alcove. Water dripped from the ceiling, collecting in a small pool on the floor. The liquid glowed faintly with the same sickly luminescence as the fungus. I needed to catch my breath, to think. The tunnels seemed to form a complex maze, and I had no idea which way would lead us back to the surface. My flashlight beam had grown so dim as to be almost useless. I clicked it off to conserve what little battery might remain. "We need to find our way out, Scout," I said, as much to hear a human voice as to communicate with my dog. "Can you smell fresh air? Find a way out?" Scout sniffed the air, then turned in a complete circle, nose working. He seemed confused, whining softly. A sudden thought struck me. What if there was no way out? What if these tunnels existed in some space between spaces, as the creature had suggested? I pushed the thought away. There had to be an exit. We'd entered, which meant we could leave. A soft sound from deeper in the tunnel caught my attention. A whimper, like that of a frightened dog. Scout heard it too, his ears perking up. "Hello," I called against my better judgment. "Is someone there?" Another whimper, followed by a familiar bark. My blood ran cold. It sounded exactly like Scout, yet Scout stood beside me, his body tense. "Don't trust it," I told him, placing a hand on his back. "It's trying to trick us." From the darkness emerged Scout, an identical copy of my border collie, down to the white blaze on his chest and the small notch in his left ear from a long-ago encounter with barbed wire. The only difference was the eyes, flat, lifeless like glass. My Scout growled, positioning himself between me and the doppelganger. The copy tilted its head, then sat back on its haunches and whined pitifully, looking for all the world like a lost dog seeking help. "Nice try," I said to the darkness behind the false Scout, "but we're not falling for it." The copy's form rippled, then flowed upward, reshaping itself into a human figure. Angela stood before me, exactly as I remembered her from the day she'd left. Blue sundress, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, that small mole at the corner of her mouth that I'd once found so endearing. "Nate," she said, her voice a perfect mimicry of my ex-wife's. "I've been looking everywhere for you. I made a terrible mistake. Please, let's go home." The sight of her, or rather, this thing pretending to be her, sent a jolt of pain through my chest, followed quickly by anger. "You don't get to wear her face," I spat. "You don't get to use her against me." The false Angela smiled, but it wasn't her smile anymore. Too wide, too many teeth. "But she hurt you so deeply, didn't she? Left you empty enough to wander into our domain. We should thank her, really." I turned away, tugging Scout with me. "We're done talking. Let's go, boy." We moved deeper into the tunnel, away from the shapeshifter. The passage narrowed again, forcing me to crouch. Scout pressed close to my side, a reassuring presence in the nightmare we'd found ourselves in. After several minutes of careful progress, the tunnel opened up again. Not into a chamber this time, but a junction where multiple passages converged. In the dim glow of the fungal light, I counted 6 different tunnels branching off from this central point. "Which way?" I muttered, looking from one dark opening to another. They all looked identical. A figure stepped out of one of the tunnels. Not the creature this time, but a man. Middle-aged, with a weathered face and the lean build of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. He wore a park ranger uniform, though it looked oddly dated, like something from decades past. "You folks lost?" he asked, his voice friendly and utterly normal. "These old caves can be tricky to navigate if you don't know them." I stared at him, knife raised defensively. "Who are you?" "Name's Bill Harker," he said, touching the brim of his ranger hat. "Been working these grasslands since '85. You're the first visitors I've seen in these caves in a long while." Scout didn't growl at the man, which gave me pause. He'd reacted instantly to the creature and its shape-shifting imitation of himself. Could this ranger be real? Another victim trapped in this maze? "How do you know your way around down here?" I asked, still suspicious. Ranger Harker, if that's who he really was, shrugged. "Part of the job is knowing the territory. These caves aren't on any official maps, but locals know about them. Used to be that kids would dare each other to come explore. Until..." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Until what?" I prompted. "Until some of them didn't come back," he finished quietly. "Place got a bad reputation after that. The Park Service had me post warning signs, but they keep disappearing. He glanced around nervously. Look, we shouldn't stay in one place too long. I can help you find your way out, but we need to move. I hesitated. Everything about this felt wrong, yet Scout wasn't reacting negatively to the man, and I desperately needed help navigating this labyrinth. Which tunnel leads out? I asked, not committing to following him just yet. Harker pointed to one of the passages. That one eventually connects to a series of smaller caves that open out near the river. It's a bit of a squeeze in places, but it's the safest route. And how long have you been down here, Ranger Harker? A flicker of something, confusion, fear, crossed his face. Hard to keep track of time in these caves. No sunlight, you know? But I was doing my regular patrol, checking the boundaries of the grassland when I heard sounds coming from one of the cave entrances. Thought maybe some kids had gone exploring again, so I came to investigate. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Lucky for you, I did. Huh? I studied him closely. His uniform was definitely outdated, with a patch style the Park Service hadn't used in decades. And there was something about his eyes, a flatness similar to what I'd seen in the false scout's gaze. What year is it, Ranger Harker? I asked suddenly. He blinked. What kind of question is that? It's 1987, of course. A chill ran down my spine. No, it's not. It's 2024. Harker's face remained frozen for a moment, then slowly began to change, not melting or flowing like the creature's transformations, but aging rapidly before my eyes. His skin sagged, then tightened over his skull. His eyes sank into their sockets, and his uniform faded to tatters hanging from an increasingly skeletal frame. 1987 was when I made the same mistake you did. The thing that had been Ranger Harker rasped, its voice now a dry whisper. I heard a child crying in these caves. Came to rescue them. Never found the child, but I found her. Or she found me. The skeletal figure took a shambling step toward me. She keeps parts of us, you see. Enough to lure others. I've been her puppet for so long. I backed away, horrified. Scout growled now, sensing the change in the entity before us. I'm sorry, I said, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. We're going to find a way out. The thing that had been Harker reached out with a skeletal hand. Take me with you, it pleaded. I've been here so long, so hungry, so cold. I turned and ran, choosing a tunnel at random, not the one the false ranger had recommended. Scout kept pace, and behind us, I heard the dry scrape of bone against stone as the remnant of Bill Harker pursued us, driven by whatever fragment of will the creature allowed it to retain. This new tunnel twisted sharply downward, then leveled out into a straight passage that seemed to go on forever. The fungal glow was brighter here, revealing detailed carvings on the walls. Not modern graffiti, but ancient symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The air grew colder, my breath clouding heavily in front of me. We ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled with exhaustion. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, the sound of pursuit had faded. I leaned against the tunnel wall, sliding down to sit on the cold stone floor. Scout remained standing, alert and watchful. We need a plan, I gasped, trying to think clearly despite the fear clouding my mind. These tunnels have to connect to the surface somewhere. I tried to visualize the rock formation as I'd seen it from outside. It hadn't seemed large enough to contain this extensive network of tunnels and chambers. Either I was completely turned around and moving in circles, or the internal space somehow exceeded the external dimensions. An impossibility that nevertheless seemed plausible in this nightmarish place. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of a new sound, a subtle vibration in the stone beneath me, more felt than heard. It reminded me of the distant rumble of a subway train, growing incrementally louder. I scrambled to my feet. Something's coming. Let's move. We continued down the passage, the vibration intensifying with each step. The tunnel began to widen again, the ceiling rising beyond the reach of the fungal light. The air took on a strange quality, thicker, heavier, with a metallic taste that coated my tongue. The tunnel ended abruptly at a sheer drop. I nearly pitched over the edge before Scout's warning bark alerted me. I fell to my knees and crawled forward cautiously until I could peer into the void below. What I saw defied comprehension. A vast cavern stretched beneath us, so large that the opposite wall was lost in darkness. The floor, at least 50 feet below our position, appeared to be moving, a writhing mass of something. In the glow of what looked like thousands of the luminescent fungi, I could make out shapes rising and falling like the surface of a stormy sea. The vibration had become a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from this living floor. With growing horror, I realized what I was seeing: holes. Thousands upon thousands of perfectly circular holes of varying sizes, opening and closing in hypnotic patterns. The trypophobia that had unsettled me at the rock formation returned 100-fold, sending waves of nausea and dizziness through me. "Oh, God," I whispered, backing away from the edge. "It's all one thing. The rocks, the tunnels, all of it. It's alive." "Very good, Nathan," came a voice from behind us. "Few understand so quickly." The old woman, or the creature wearing her form, stood blocking our retreat, her body now elongated to an impossible height, her limbs bent at unnatural angles. Behind her, like a grotesque parade, stood all the forms she had shown us: the false scout, the decayed Ranger Harker, and others I hadn't seen before, a young woman in hiking gear with a gaping hole where her throat should have been, twin boys in outdated clothes, their eyes missing and skin translucent as paper, an older man in a business suit, his chest cavity open and empty. "What you see below is merely one small part of what we are," the creature said, gesturing toward the drop with one elongated arm. "We extend throughout this land, in ways your limited perception cannot grasp. The rocks you found so disturbing are our, let's call them sensory organs. The tunnels, our circulatory system. And this," she indicated the champing mass below, "is one of many stomachs." Scout pressed against my legs, trembling but still defiant. I reached down to touch his head, drawing courage from his presence. "You've fed on people for how long?" I asked, playing for time while desperately searching for an escape route. The creature tilted its head in that now familiar, impossible angle. "Since before your kind walked upright. Since before the grass grew and the rivers flowed. We were here when this land was sea, and we will be here when it is sea again." It gestured to the parade of horrors behind it. These are but morsels preserved for particular purposes: lures, messengers, entertainment. "And what do you want from me?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Want?" The creature seemed amused. "We want what any living thing wants: to feed, to grow, to perpetuate ourselves." It took a step closer. "But you, Nathan Reeves, you interest us. Your pain has a particular flavor. Your loneliness, a distinct aroma. We might keep a part of you as we have these others. Your dog, too. He has shown remarkable resilience to our influence." I glanced around desperately. The only way out seemed to be past the creature and its macabre collection of victims, an impossibility. The drop behind us was too far to survive. Then I noticed something. A narrow ledge ran along the wall of the cavern just below the tunnel entrance where we stood. It appeared to lead to another opening about 30 feet away, a smaller tunnel that might offer escape, or at least a different trap than the one closing in on us now. "You know what interests me," I said, stalling while I gauged the width of the ledge. It couldn't have been more than a foot wide. How something supposedly so ancient and powerful needs to resort to tricks and illusions to catch its prey seems pretty pathetic, really. The creature's form rippled, its approximation of a face contorting in what might have been anger. Brave words from someone with nowhere to run. "We could have taken you at any time since you entered our domain. The hunt is merely seasoning." "Well, dinner's been delayed," I said, then turned and whistled to Scout. "Come on, boy." I swung my legs over the edge of the drop and found the ledge with my feet. Scout hesitated at the edge, looking down at the dizzying drop with understandable fear. "You can make it," I encouraged him. "Come on. Trust me." Behind him, the creature and its parade of horrors surged forward. Scout made his decision, leaping down to land beside me on the narrow ledge. I immediately began sidling along the wall, one hand braced against the stone for balance, the other holding my knife. Scout followed, his claws scrabbling for purchase on the smooth rock. "You cannot escape us," the creature called, its voice reverberating throughout the cavern. Below, the massive holes seemed to churn more violently, as if excited by the prospect of food. These tunnels go on forever, looping back to where they began, a labyrinth with no exit. I ignored the taunts, focusing entirely on each careful step along the ledge. Scout whined anxiously but kept pace, his body pressed against the wall. We were halfway to the other tunnel entrance when I heard a sound that turned my blood to ice, the scrape of claws on stone, coming from behind us. Risking a glance back, I saw the false scout had followed us onto the ledge, moving with the unnatural grace of a predator. Its form rippled occasionally, revealing glimpses of something else beneath the familiar canine appearance. Something with too many limbs and eyes like obsidian pools. "Faster," I urged my scout, turning back to the task at hand. The other tunnel entrance was maybe 15 feet away now, but our pursuer was gaining quickly. 10 feet. The ledge narrowed further, forcing me to press my body flat against the wall. Scout whimpered but followed suit. 5 feet. I could feel the false scout's presence right behind us, could hear its breathing. An unnecessary affectation for something that wasn't truly alive. With a final surge of effort, I reached the tunnel entrance and pulled myself inside, then turned to help Scout. As he scrambled into the relative safety of the tunnel, the false scout lunged, its jaws closing on air inches from his tail. I kicked at the creature, connecting solidly with what should have been its head. Instead of the resistance of flesh and bone, my foot passed through a substance that felt like cold gelatin. The false scout's form destabilized momentarily, slipping partway off the ledge before reforming and pulling itself back up. I didn't wait to see more. Grabbing Scout's collar, I turned and ran deeper into this new tunnel, which sloped steeply upward, hopefully toward the surface. The passage was narrower than the others we'd traversed, forcing me to crouch at times. The fungal growth was sparser here, leaving us in near total darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on without much hope. To my surprise, it flickered to life, the beam weak but present. Perhaps we were getting far enough from the creature's influence for technology to function normally again. Behind us, I heard the false scout pursuing, its claws clicking rhythmically on the stone. The sound drove us forward, faster than was safe in the confined space. I scraped my shoulders against the rough walls, feeling my shirt tear and skin abrade. Scout yelped occasionally when sharp protrusions caught his fur. The tunnel began to twist and turn, branching at times. I chose directions instinctively, always favoring the path that seemed to lead upward. The air, which had been stagnant and cold in the lower chambers, began to feel slightly less oppressive. Could fresh air be filtering in from somewhere ahead? We emerged suddenly into a small chamber with a domed ceiling. Unlike the other spaces we'd encountered, this one showed signs of human presence. Old food wrappers, a broken flashlight, a backpack rotted with age and moisture. Most significantly, a shaft of natural light penetrated from a small opening near the top of the dome, maybe 15 feet above the floor. "There," I gasped, pointing upward. "A way out." Scout barked excitedly, seeming to understand. The walls of the chamber were rough enough to potentially climb, with numerous handholds and ledges. But before I could begin the ascent, the false scout appeared at the tunnel entrance, blocking our escape route. It stood perfectly still, watching us with those flat, lifeless eyes. Then its form began to change, flowing upward into a humanoid shape. Not the old woman this time, but something worse. Me. an exact duplicate down to the torn clothes and scratches from our frantic journey through the tunnels. "Hello, Nathan," it said in my voice. "Leaving so soon? But we've only just begun to know each other." I backed away, positioning myself between the creature in the center of the chamber where the shaft of light fell. Scout growled beside me, hackles raised. "We both know how this ends," the thing wearing my face said. "You'll never reach that opening, and even if you did, you'd find yourself right back where you started, at the rocks. They're the heart of what we are, the anchor that binds us to your world." A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. "The rocks," I said slowly. "They're organs. Eyes, you said, but they're more than that, aren't they? They're also mouths." My doppelganger smiled, too wide and with too many teeth. "Very good. They breathe, they see, they taste, they consume. They are us, and we are them." "And if they were destroyed?" I asked, my hand tightening around the knife I still carried. The smile faltered. "Impossible. We have existed for eons. We will exist for eons more." But I'd seen the uncertainty in its expression, brief but unmistakable. The rocks were vulnerable somehow. "I'm leaving," I said firmly, "and when I do, I'm coming back with enough explosives to turn your precious rocks into gravel." The creature laughed, my laugh but distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "Many have tried to harm us. Their bones litter our tunnels. Their essences feed our hunger." It took a step forward, and I retreated further into the shaft of light. To my surprise, the creature hesitated at the edge of the illuminated area. Another realization struck me. Throughout our pursuit, the creature and its manifestations had stayed in the shadows, avoiding the direct light that filtered into the caves from outside. Even now, it circled the perimeter of the chamber, never stepping directly into the beam from above. "You don't like the light, do you?" I said, understanding dawning. "Sunlight hurts you." The doppelganger's face twisted in anger, its features beginning to lose cohesion. "A temporary discomfort, nothing more. The sun sets, Nathan Reeves. Darkness always returns, and we are patient." I looked up at the opening again. It was small, maybe just large enough for a man and a dog to squeeze through. The climb would be difficult, but not impossible. "Scout," I said quietly. "We're going up." I sheathed my knife and approached the wall beneath the opening. The creature paced the perimeter of the light shaft, clearly agitated but unwilling to step into the direct sunlight. "You'll never make it," it hissed, "and even if you do, you'll find yourself lost in the grassland again. The rocks call to those who have been inside them. You'll return, just as all the others did." I ignored the taunts and began to climb, testing each handhold carefully before putting my weight on it. The rock was damp in places but provided decent grip. Scout whined anxiously from below. "Stay close. Buddy," I called down to him. "I'll help you once I reach the top." I was about halfway up when the creature made its move. Not directly through the light, but along the wall adjacent to mine, climbing with inhuman speed and grace. It kept to the shadows, avoiding the central shaft of sunlight, clearly intending to reach the opening before I could. I redoubled my efforts, ignoring the burning in my arms and the sting of reopened cuts on my hands. The creature reached the top just as I was nearing it, perching like a grotesque gargoyle at the edge of the opening. "So close," it taunted, now barely resembling me at all. Its form had partially reverted to something more primal. Elongated limbs, too many joints, a face that seemed to be constantly shifting between different features. Yet, still so far. I pulled myself up to a small ledge just below the opening, my face mere feet from the creature's. Scout barked frantically from below, sensing the danger but unable to help. "You know what your problem is?" I panted, reaching slowly for my knife. "You talk too much." In one fluid motion, I drew the knife and lunged upward, driving the blade into what I hoped was a vulnerable point, one of those two human eyes. The creature shrieked, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, reverberating through the chamber and tunnels below. Its form destabilized completely, flowing like black tar over the edge of the opening and down the wall beside me. I didn't waste the opportunity. Pulling myself up the remaining few feet, I squeezed through the opening and emerged onto the surface of the rock formation. The late afternoon sun momentarily blinded me after so long in darkness, but its warmth on my skin was the most welcome sensation I'd ever experienced. Looking back down through the opening, I could see Scout still in the chamber below, pacing anxiously. "Scout, you need to climb," I called. "Come on. Boy, you can do it." He barked once, then backed up and took a running leap at the wall, managing to scramble up several feet before sliding back down. Another attempt yielded similar results. "Come on, Scout," I urged, reaching down through the opening as far as I could, though my arm didn't extend nearly far enough to help him. From the shadows at the edge of the chamber, I saw movement. The creature was reforming, its shape oscillating between various forms. The old woman, my doppelganger, the false Scout, and others I didn't recognize. "He's ours now," it hissed, voice echoing from multiple throats. "A fair trade. Go if you can find your way. But know that part of you remains with us." "No," I shouted. "Scout, you have to climb, now." Whether it was the desperation in my voice or his own survival instinct, Scout made one more attempt. This time he found purchase on a series of small ledges, moving diagonally across the wall until he reached a spot directly below me. With a mighty leap, he managed to grab onto a larger protrusion about 5 feet below the opening. The creature surged forward, still avoiding the direct sunlight but closing in on Scout from the sides. One elongated arm reached for his back leg. "Jump, Scout!" I screamed. "Jump now!" With a desperate lunge, Scout pushed off from his perch, launching himself upward toward the opening. His front paws caught the edge, claws scrabbling for purchase on the smooth stone. I grabbed his collar, pulling with all my remaining strength. For a terrifying moment, he hung suspended, his back legs kicking at empty air. Below, the creature rose up like a dark wave, reaching for him with multiple appendages. One brushed against his hind leg, and Scout yelped in pain, the sound giving me a final surge of adrenaline. With a guttural roar of effort, I heaved him up and through the opening. We collapsed together on the surface of the rock formation, both panting heavily. Scout's leg, where the creature had touched him, was marked with what looked like a severe frostbite burn. The fur singed away and skin blackened. "It's okay, boy," I soothed, examining the wound. "We're out. We made it." I looked around, getting my bearings. We were indeed on top of the rock formation, the prairie stretching in all directions around us. The sun was lower in the sky than I'd expected. We must have spent most of the day in those hellish tunnels, but it still cast enough light to hold the creature at bay, at least for now. Carefully, I helped Scout to his feet. He limped badly but could walk. We needed to get as far from this place as possible before darkness fell. Looking down at the rock formation beneath our feet, I could now see what I'd missed before. The holes and crevices that had triggered my trypophobia weren't random. They formed patterns, symmetries that hinted at a terrible intelligence. The entire formation was one massive organism, or perhaps a colony of interconnected entities that had existed here for millennia, feeding on the fear and flesh of those unfortunate enough to wander too close. "Let's go home, Scout," I said, finding a path down the far side of the formation. We made our way carefully back toward the trailhead, Scout limping but determined. I kept expecting to become disoriented again, to find myself wandering in circles as I had earlier, but the creature's influence seemed diminished in full daylight. We reached my truck just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grassland. As I helped Scout into the passenger seat, I glanced back toward the distant rock formation, now silhouetted against the darkening sky. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a tall, spindly figure standing atop the highest point, watching us. Then it was gone, either a trick of the light or a promise of future encounters. I started the engine and drove away without looking back again, pushing the truck to its limits on the rough dirt road. We didn't stop until we reached the main highway, the lights of civilization visible in the distance. That was 3 months ago. Scout's leg healed, though the fur never grew back over the blackened patch of skin. I moved away from Kansas City, finding a small apartment in Santa Fe where the desert light pours through the windows from sunrise to sunset. But I haven't forgotten my promise. In my closet sits a box containing detailed maps of the Cimarron National Grassland, information on demolition techniques, and a plan for returning to that cursed rock formation, not alone next time, but with tools and allies who might believe my story. Because sometimes at night, when the darkness is absolute, I hear a voice, her voice, whispering from the shadows in my room. And Scout still growls at empty corners, seeing things I cannot. The rocks are waiting, and they're still hungry. My name is Emma Carver, and I am 32 years old. This happened in October 2023. The familiar weight of my backpack pressed against my shoulders as I hiked deeper into the Clinton State Park forest. 3 days into my week-long solo expedition, I'd finally found the peace I'd been craving since my divorce. The autumn air carried the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth, a welcome change from the sterile hospital corridors where I spent my workdays as an ER nurse. I'd chosen this remote northwestern corner of Clinton State Park specifically because few hikers ventured this far from the main trails. My plan was to reach Sutton Lake, a small hidden body of water that most tourists never discovered, tucked away behind rocky outcroppings and dense forest land. Local forums mentioned its pristine beauty, but warned about difficult terrain and spotty cell service. Perfect, I thought. Isolation was exactly what I needed. As I checked my location on my paper map, I never fully trusted GPS in remote areas, I noted the afternoon sun beginning its descent. 3 more hours of daylight, which meant I needed to find a suitable campsite soon. The wind picked up, sending a shiver across my skin that had nothing to do with the cooling temperature. Something felt different out here. The forest had grown quieter the farther I traveled from the marked trails. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just silence and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. It's just the isolation playing tricks on your mind, I told myself. This is why you came out here, remember? To get away from noise and people. I found a small clearing near a creek around dusk and quickly set up my tent. Years of weekend camping trips had made the routine second nature. Tent up, sleeping bag unrolled, food stored securely away from my sleeping area. I collected firewood while there was still enough light to see clearly, built a small fire pit with stones from the creek bed, and soon had a cheerful blaze going. As darkness fell completely, the forest transformed. Shadows deepened and twisted, cast by my fire's flickering light. The silence seemed to press in around me, interrupted only by the occasional crack from my fire or the distant hoot of an owl. I warmed a packet of dehydrated beef stew over my portable stove and ate slowly, savoring both the taste and the absolute solitude. The divorce from Mark had been finalized just 2 months ago, ending our 7-year marriage with nothing but paperwork and bitter memories. He'd moved on quickly, too quickly with someone from his office. The betrayal still stung, but out here it seemed less important. After cleaning my dishes with water from the creek, I settled beside the fire with my journal, documenting the day's hike and my observations. I was in the middle of describing a particularly beautiful ridge I'd crossed when I first heard it, a whisper so faint I initially mistook it for the wind. I paused, pen hovering above paper, listening intently. Nothing but the crackle of my fire. "You're imagining things," I thought, returning to my writing. Then it came again, slightly louder. A whispered word that almost sounded like a name. "Hello," I called out, immediately feeling foolish. I knew no one else was out here. That was the entire point of coming to this remote location. Silence answered me. I closed my journal and added another log to the fire, watching the flames leap higher. The light pushed back the darkness, but only for a small radius. Beyond that circle of warmth, The night seemed impossibly black. "Just the wind," I muttered aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even my own. I retreated to my tent earlier than planned, zipping myself securely inside. My headlamp cast a cone of light against the tent's orange fabric as I settled into my sleeping bag. Outside, the fire continued to burn, though it would die out soon without additional fuel. Sleep came uneasily, filled with half-formed dreams and sudden starts at imagined sounds. Sometime in the middle of the night, I jerked awake, breath caught in my throat. Something was moving outside my tent, not the wind this time. This was deliberate movement, the sound of footsteps circling slowly around my campsite. Light, careful steps, as if whatever it was didn't want to be heard. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, straining my ears. The footsteps completed a circuit around my tent, then paused directly in front of the zippered entrance. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain it could be heard outside the thin nylon walls. I reached for my knife, a practical camping tool rather than a weapon, but comforting nonetheless, and clutched it tightly. "Who's there?" I called, trying to make my voice sound confident, unafraid. The silence that followed was absolute. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. After what felt like an hour but was probably only minutes, I slowly unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The dying embers of my fire cast a faint red glow across the clearing. Nothing moved in that dim light. No person, no animal, nothing. I closed the tent and huddled in my sleeping bag, knife still in hand, until exhaustion finally pulled me down into a restless sleep. Morning arrived with bright sunshine and birdsong, making the night's fears seem foolish and overblown. I emerged from my tent, stiff and tired, to find my campsite exactly as I'd left it. No footprints in the soft earth around my tent, no evidence of any nocturnal visitor. Probably a deer, I reasoned as I boiled water for coffee. Or your imagination working overtime. After a quick breakfast, I broke camp and continued my journey toward Sutton Lake. The map showed I was only about 4 miles away, an easy morning's hike. The forest seemed friendlier in daylight, with sunlight filtering through the canopy and occasional wildlife sightings. A red squirrel here, a woodpecker there. Around midday, I stopped at a small stream to refill my water bottles and check my bearings. That's when I noticed something odd. A small pile of stones arranged in what was clearly a deliberate pattern. 7 smooth river rocks, stacked in a tight circle with one larger stone in the center. I frowned, studying the formation. It didn't look natural, and yet who would come all the way out here just to arrange some stones? Perhaps another hiker had passed through recently and left this as some kind of marker. I photographed the stone arrangement with my phone, then continued hiking, pushing the discovery to the back of my mind. The terrain grew more challenging as I approached the lake, with steep inclines and dense undergrowth that sometimes required me to backtrack and find alternative routes. By mid-afternoon, I caught my first glimpse of Sutton Lake through the trees, a flash of dark blue water reflecting the sky. I quickened my pace, eager to reach my destination and set up camp before evening. The lake was small but beautiful, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides and a rocky cliff face on the 4th. The water was remarkably clear, revealing sandy shallows near the shore that gave way to deeper blue-black depths toward the center. I found a flat area about 30 feet from the shoreline and began setting up camp. As I hammered tent stakes into the ground, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I paused several times to scan the surrounding forest and the cliff face, but saw nothing unusual. With my tent secured, I explored the immediate area, gathering firewood and getting a feel for the landscape. That's when I discovered the second stone arrangement, identical to the first, 7 stones in a circle with 1 in the center. This one was placed at the water's edge, half submerged in the lake. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. Someone had been here recently enough that the wave action hadn't disturbed the stones. I took another photo and returned to my campsite, now paying closer attention to my surroundings. The sun hung low in the west, casting long shadows across the lake. I built my fire larger than the previous night, needing the expanded circle of light and warmth. As I prepared dinner, my ears picked up a sound from across the lake, a faint melody, almost like someone humming. I stood still, listening hard, but it faded as quickly as it had come. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone there?" My voice echoed slightly against the cliff face. Then silence returned, heavier than before. The lake surface remained perfectly still, reflecting the darkening sky like a mirror. I finished my meal quickly and added more wood to the fire, building it higher than necessary for the mild evening. Something about this place felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. A pressure in the air, a sense of anticipation. Night fell completely. The stars emerged brilliant and cold above the lake, with no light pollution to dim their glow. Under different circumstances, I would have found it beautiful. Tonight, it only emphasized my isolation. I was organizing my pack by firelight when my headlamp, which I'd placed on a nearby rock, flickered and went out. I picked it up, tapping it against my palm, but it remained dark. The batteries had been new when I started this trip, and I'd barely used the lamp. "Great," I muttered, digging in my pack for spares. I always carried extras, a habit formed over years of outdoor trips. I found the small package of lithium batteries and opened it, only to discover that each one showed signs of corrosion, the metal contacts covered with a white powdery substance. That was impossible. I'd checked all my equipment before leaving home, and these batteries had been sealed in their original packaging. I dropped them back into my pack, unsettled. Without a working headlamp, the darkness beyond my fire felt more threatening. I added the last of my gathered wood to the flames and decided to turn in early, hoping to read for a while by the light of my phone before sleeping. Inside my tent, I pulled out my journal to record the day's strange discoveries, but found myself hesitating over what to write. How to describe the unnatural silence of the forest, the perfectly arranged stones, the mysterious humming across the lake. Each incident seemed minor on its own, but together they formed a pattern that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I was writing about the corroded batteries when my phone chirped with an incoming text message. I stared at the device in surprise. I hadn't expected any signal out here. The message was from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have come to the lake, Emma." My breath caught in my throat. How did anyone know I was here? I hadn't told anyone my exact destination, just that I was going hiking in Clinton State Park. And how did they have my name? I tried to call the number, but the call failed to connect. I attempted to reply to the text, but that failed as well. When I checked my signal strength, my phone showed no service at all. A glitch. It had to be. Some random text meant for someone else had somehow reached me during a momentary connection, and it was just coincidence that it mentioned a lake and someone named Emma. But I didn't believe that. Not really. I put the phone down and tried to focus on my journal again, but the words swam before my eyes. Outside, the fire popped and crackled, burning through the last of my wood. Then I heard it. Footsteps again, circling my tent, just like the night before. But these sounded different, heavier, more purposeful. I reached for my knife, clutching it so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Who's there?" I called, my voice high and tight with fear. The footsteps stopped. Then came a new sound, the slow, deliberate unzipping of my tent. I scrambled backwards, pressing against the far side of the tent as the entrance flap opened. Firelight silhouetted a human figure, tall, broad-shouldered, definitely male. "Who are you?" I demanded, holding the knife in front of me. "What do you want?" The figure didn't enter the tent, just stood there, outlined by the dying fire behind him. "We've been waiting for you, Emma," he said, his voice oddly gentle, almost sad. "You shouldn't have come alone." "How do you know my name?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Everyone knows your name here," he replied cryptically. "You've been expected." "I don't understand," I said. Please, just tell me who you are." He stepped back from the tent entrance. "Come out and see for yourself. We've prepared everything." Against every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I moved toward the tent opening, knife still gripped firmly in my hand. Something told me that staying in the tent wouldn't protect me from whatever was happening. I emerged into the firelight to find not just one man, but 3 figures standing in a semicircle around my tent. The man who had spoken was middle-aged, with a weathered face and dark beard threaded with gray. Beside him stood an older woman, her silver hair hanging loose around a lined face, and a younger man, perhaps in his 20s, who bore a striking resemblance to the older one. "Who are you people?" I asked, keeping my distance, knife raised defensively. "How did you find me?" "I'm Gerald Sutton," the older man said. "This is my mother, Eliza, and my son, Daniel. You're on our land." "Sutton?" I repeated. "Like the lake?" The woman, Eliza, nodded slowly. "Our family has lived here for generations, long before this became state park land. We have an arrangement with the authorities." Something about the way she said arrangement made me deeply uneasy. "I'm sorry if I'm trespassing," I said, thinking quickly. "I can pack up and leave first thing in the morning." Gerald shook his head. "That's not why we're here, Emma. We came because the lake chose you." I stared at him, wondering if I was dealing with some kind of backwoods cult. The lake didn't choose me. I chose to come here because I read about it online. "And why do you think you found that information?" The younger man, Daniel, spoke for the first time. "Why do you think you felt so drawn to this specific place?" My mouth went dry. It was true that I'd felt almost compelled to visit Sutton Lake once I'd read about it, but that was just normal interest in a beautiful, secluded spot, wasn't it? "What do you want from me?" I asked bluntly. The 3 exchanged glances, then Eliza stepped forward. "The lake needs someone new," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic. "It's been too long since the last offering." "Offering?" I repeated, my grip tightening on the knife. "Not like you're thinking," Gerald said quickly. "No one's going to hurt you. Emma, we just need you to listen, to understand what's happening here." Against my better judgment, I found myself curious. "Tell me then." Gerald gestured toward the fire. "Let's sit. This is a long story." I hesitated, then moved cautiously to sit on a log near the fire, positioning myself so I could see all 3 of them. They arranged themselves across from me, the firelight casting strange shadows across their faces. "This lake has always been special," Gerald began. "The Kansa people knew it. They called it the Place of Whispers and left offerings here, food, tobacco, carved figures. They knew that something lived in these waters, something old and hungry, something that needed to be appeased." I glanced toward the dark water, eerily still despite the light breeze rustling the trees. "My ancestors settled here in the 1850s, he continued. "They didn't understand at first. They thought it was just a beautiful spot for a homestead. But they learned, just like you're learning now." "Learning what?" I asked. "That the lake calls to certain people." Eliza picked up the story. "Draws them here when it's hungry. And once they come, they belong to it." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. "I don't belong to anything or anyone," I said firmly. "Did you hear whispers last night?" Daniel asked suddenly. "Did you find stone arrangements? Did your equipment start to fail?" The accuracy of his questions left me momentarily speechless. "The signs are always the same," he said, nodding as if my silence was confirmation enough. "The lake has chosen you." "For what?" I demanded. "To join with it," Eliza said simply. "To become part of it, like we all are. Like our family has been for generations." I stood up abruptly. "This is insane. I'm leaving right now." I moved toward my tent, intending to grab my essential gear and hike out, even in darkness. "You can try," Gerald said calmly. "But you won't get far. The lake won't let you go now that it's found you." "Watch me," I snapped, ducking into my tent to grab my backpack. When I emerged, I found all 3 Suttons standing exactly where I'd left them, watching me with expressions that mixed pity and resignation. "At least wait until morning," Gerald suggested. "These woods are dangerous at night, especially for someone the lake has claimed." I hesitated. As much as I wanted to get away from these people and their bizarre cult-like talk, hiking out in darkness would be extremely dangerous. I could easily get lost or injured. "Fine," I conceded reluctantly. "But I'm leaving at first light." "Of course," Eliza nodded. "We'll come back for you then." They turned to go, moving with surprising silence through the underbrush. "Wait," I called after them. "What does the lake want from me?" Gerald paused, looking back over his shoulder. "It wants what we all want eventually, Emma. Peace, connection, to not be alone in the dark." With that cryptic answer, they disappeared into the night, leaving me alone beside my dying fire. I didn't sleep. How could I? I sat by the rekindled fire until dawn, knife in hand, jumping at every sound from the surrounding forest. When the lake's surface began to reflect the first pale light of day, I quickly packed my gear, determined to hike out and report the strange encounter to park authorities. My phone remained dead, despite showing a full battery. My GPS device similarly showed only a blank screen. Even my compass was acting strangely, the needle spinning aimlessly instead of pointing north. I'd have to navigate by the sun and my paper map. Shouldering my pack, I set off in what I believed was the direction of the main park area, deliberately choosing a route away from where the Suttons had disappeared. After an hour of hiking, I stopped to check my bearings. According to my map and the position of the sun, I should have been heading southeast, back toward the marked trails. But something felt wrong. The terrain didn't match what I was expecting. I pushed on for another hour before admitting the truth to myself. I was lost. Worse, I had the distinct feeling I was moving in circles. Certain landmarks seemed familiar, as if I'd passed them before. By midday, exhausted and increasingly desperate, I climbed a tall ridge to get a better view of my surroundings. What I saw from that vantage point made my blood run cold. In the distance, through a gap in the trees, I could see water glittering in the sunlight. Sutton Lake. Somehow, despite hiking for hours in what I thought was the opposite direction, I had circled back to it. My legs gave way, and I sat heavily on a boulder, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. What was happening to me? Was I losing my mind? Or was there some truth to the Suttons' bizarre claims about the lake choosing people, not letting them leave? I took several deep breaths, forcing myself to think rationally. There had to be a logical explanation. I must have become disoriented, followed game trails that looped back on themselves. It happened to experienced hikers sometimes. Nothing supernatural about it. With renewed determination, I studied my map carefully, identifying clear landmarks to follow. This time, I would not get lost. I set off again, moving deliberately, marking my path by breaking small branches and tying bits of bright orange paracord to trees. Even if I somehow got turned around again, I would know if I crossed my own trail. The afternoon wore on. I hiked steadily, checking and double-checking my route against the map. But as the shadows lengthened, I made a horrifying discovery. Ahead of me on the trail was a piece of my own orange paracord, tied exactly as I had left it just an hour before. I had completed another perfect circle, despite all my precautions. Panic rose in my throat, threatening to overwhelm me. I forced it down, reminding myself that I was an experienced hiker. This was just a particularly challenging landscape, with similar-looking features that were confusing me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. As the sun began to set, I realized I needed to make camp again. The prospect of spending another night in these woods terrified me, but hiking in darkness would be even more dangerous, especially in my current state of confusion. I found a small clearing and mechanically went through the motions of setting up camp. No fire this time. I didn't want to attract the Suttons or anyone else who might be out there. In the growing darkness, I sat in my tent with my headlamp, now mysteriously working again, and tried to formulate a plan. If I couldn't find my way out by conventional means, maybe I needed to try something different. The park wasn't that large. If I picked a direction and walked long enough, I would eventually reach a boundary, a road or a populated area. A soft whisper from outside froze me in place. "Emma!" It wasn't one of the Suttons. The voice was different, fluid, almost bubbling like water over stones. "Emma, come to the water." I held my breath, straining to hear more. The voice came again, closer this time, just outside my tent. "We've been waiting so long. Come to us." My hand shook as I reached for the tent zipper. Some small part of my mind screamed at me to stay put, to ignore the voice, but a stronger compulsion pulled me forward. I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The clearing was empty, bathed in pale moonlight. "This way, Emma. Follow my voice." The whispering seemed to come from beyond the trees now, in the direction of the lake. Against every rational instinct, I found myself getting to my feet, stepping out of the tent, following that liquid voice through the moonlit forest. Time seemed to blur as I walked. I wasn't consciously choosing my path, just following the whispers that pulled me forward like an invisible thread. Tree branches brushed against my face and arms, but I barely noticed. The forest opened up, and suddenly I was standing at the edge of Sutton Lake again. The water gleamed silver under the full moon, perfectly still despite the breeze that stirred the surrounding trees. Standing at the water's edge were the Suttons, Gerald, Eliza, and Daniel, along with 7 other people of varying ages, all arranged in a semicircle facing the lake. They turned as I approached, their faces solemn in the moonlight. "You see," Gerald said quietly, "the lake always brings you back." I wanted to run, to scream, to fight, but my body wouldn't obey. I could only stand there, staring at the group and the unnaturally still water beyond them. "Don't be afraid," Eliza said, stepping forward to take my hand. Her skin felt oddly cool and damp. "It's actually a wonderful thing, being chosen. An honor." "What's happening to me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "The lake is calling you home," she replied, "just as it called all of us, over the years." Daniel approached from my other side. "We're the guardians," he explained. "We hear the lake's voice, understand its needs. We bring it what it requires, and in return, it gives us certain gifts." "Gifts?" I repeated numbly. "Long life," Gerald said. "A connection to something ancient and powerful. Freedom from illness, from aging, at least in the usual way." I looked more closely at the other people in the group. There was something off about them all. Their skin had a faintly translucent quality in the moonlight, and their eyes reflected the water's gleam a little too perfectly. "What are you?" I whispered. "We are the lake, and the lake is us," Eliza said simply. "And now it wants you too." The water behind them began to move, rippling outward from the center of the lake. The surface bulged upward, forming a shape that rose slowly into the air, a column of water that twisted and shaped itself into a vaguely humanoid form. My mind rebelled at the sight. This couldn't be happening. It defied everything I understood about the natural world. The water figure drifted closer to shore, its movements fluid and graceful. As it approached, I could make out features forming in what passed for its head, indentations for eyes, a mouth that opened and closed as if speaking, though no sound came out. "Emma Carver." The voice bubbled in my mind rather than my ears. "You have come to us at last." "What do you want from me?" I asked, surprised I could still speak. "To join us, to become part of something greater than yourself. You are alone, broken by betrayal, seeking purpose." The creature, whatever it was, knew me, knew about my divorce, my pain. "We can give you peace, Emma. No more loneliness, no more betrayal, just unity, purpose, belonging." The offer touched something deep inside me, a raw wound that hadn't healed. How did it know exactly what would tempt me most? If I refuse? I asked, finding a small core of resistance within me. Gerald answered this time. No one refuses, not really. You might leave the lake physically, but it's already part of you now. You'll find yourself drawn back here again and again until you accept what's being offered. Or until you die trying to stay away, Daniel added softly. That happens sometimes too. The water creature extended what might have been an arm, reaching toward me. Choose unity, Emma. Choose us. I took an involuntary step backward. I need time to think. Time means nothing to us, the creature replied. But you may have what you need. Return to your shelter. When you are ready, come to the water again. The figure began to collapse, water splashing back into the lake until its surface was once again still and reflective. The Suttons and the others watched me silently, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. I'll escort you back to your tent, Gerald offered. The forest can be confusing when you're upset. I nodded mutely, too overwhelmed to argue. We walked in silence through the moonlit trees until my tent came into view. We'll be waiting, Gerald said simply, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. I crawled into my tent, zipping it securely as if thin nylon could protect me from whatever was happening. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Was I hallucinating? Having some kind of breakdown brought on by stress and isolation? But I knew what I'd seen. The water rising up, taking shape, the voices in my head, the strange, otherworldly appearance of the Suttons and their companions. I had to get away from this place, no matter what they said about the lake not letting me leave. I was Emma Carver, not some sacrifice to an ancient water spirit or whatever this was. I made my own choices. I would rest briefly, then try again to hike out, this time following the shoreline until I found a stream leading away from the lake. Water always flowed downhill, toward larger bodies. If I followed an outflow, it would eventually lead me to civilization. Sleep claimed me despite my fear, a heavy, dreamless unconsciousness that left me disoriented when I awoke to gray pre-dawn light filtering through the tent fabric. I packed quickly and set out while mist still hung over the lake's surface. The Suttons were nowhere to be seen, but I felt watched nonetheless. I found a small stream leading away from the lake and began following it downstream, moving as quickly as the rough terrain would allow. Hours passed. The stream grew gradually larger, fed by smaller tributaries. I gained confidence with each mile, believing I was finally breaking free of whatever strange influence the lake had over me. Then the stream curved sharply, widening into a familiar body of water. Sutton. Lake. Again. I sank to my knees at the shoreline, a sob of frustration tearing from my throat. It wasn't possible. I had followed the water downstream, away from the lake. Rivers didn't flow in circles. It's pointless to fight it, a voice said behind me. I turned to find Daniel Sutton standing a few feet away, watching me with those strange reflective eyes. The geography around the lake shifts for those it has chosen, he explained. No matter which direction you travel, you'll find yourself back here eventually. That's impossible, I whispered. He shrugged. So, is a creature made of living water? Yet you saw it last night. I couldn't argue with that. What happens if I say yes? I asked finally. If I join with the lake or whatever this is, what happens to me? Daniel smiled, and for a moment he looked almost human, almost kind. You become something more than human. Not quite immortal, but close. You become part of a community, a family that understands what it means to be different, to be chosen. Do I die? The question was hard to ask, but I needed to know. Your old life ends, he acknowledged. But something new begins, something wonderful. And if I keep refusing? His expression grew troubled. The lake's patience is not infinite, Emma. Eventually, it will take what it wants, with or without your consent. Those who come willingly have a better transition. I stared out at the calm water, considering my options. They seemed increasingly limited. Can I have one more night to decide? I asked. Daniel nodded. Of course, but I should warn you, the longer you resist, the stronger the lake's call becomes. You may find it uncomfortable. After he left, I returned to my campsite and mechanically set up my tent again. The day passed in a haze of anxiety and indecision. I tried once more to leave, hiking in a straight line away from the lake, using my compass despite its erratic behavior. 3 hours later, I emerged from the trees to find myself back at the shoreline. As night fell, the whispers began again, louder this time, more insistent. They filled my head, making coherent thought almost impossible. Emma, come to us. Become one with us. No more pain, no more loneliness. I covered my ears, but it made no difference. The voices were inside my mind, impossible to block out. Water. I needed water. The thought arose suddenly, an overwhelming thirst unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My water bottle was right beside me, but somehow I knew it wouldn't satisfy this craving. Only the lake would do. I fought the compulsion for hours, huddled in my tent as the whispers grew to a deafening chorus. My skin felt dry, painfully so, as if I was dehydrating from the inside out. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Just before dawn, I broke. Stumbling from my tent, I half ran, half fell toward the lake's edge. The surface seemed to reach for me as I approached, small ripples breaking the moonlit stillness. The Suttons were waiting, along with the others, their faces expressionless as I staggered past them and waded into the shallow water. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The moment the water touched my skin, the painful dryness vanished, replaced by a sensation of blissful coolness spreading through my body. I waded deeper until the water reached my waist, then my chest. Part of me screamed to turn back, to fight, to run, but that voice grew fainter with each step. The lake's surface began to move again, water rising up to form that strange humanoid shape. It towered over me, regarding me with hollow depressions where eyes should be. "You have come," it said in my mind. "Are you ready to join us, Emma Carver? To become part of something eternal?" I looked back at the shore, at my abandoned tent and gear, symbols of the life I was leaving behind. A life of loneliness, of heartbreak, of struggling to find meaning after everything had fallen apart. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Simply surrender," the creature replied. "Open yourself to the water, to us." I closed my eyes, feeling the gentle pressure of the lake against my body. Was this really happening? Was I really considering giving myself to this thing? This ancient entity that had somehow trapped me here? But what choice did I have? I would never escape this place now. The lake had made that clear. I opened my eyes one last time, looking up at the stars visible through the trees. Then I took a deep breath and let myself sink beneath the surface. The water closed over my head, cool and welcoming. I expected to feel the need to breathe, the panic of drowning, but it never came. Instead, I felt the water entering me, through my nose, my mouth, my ears, even through my skin, filling me completely. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. Memories flashed before me. The lake's memories, stretching back centuries. Native people leaving offerings at the shore. Early settlers discovering the strange properties of the water. The first Sutton making a pact with the entity that dwelled here. Decades of chosen ones joining with the lake, becoming part of its consciousness, its collective. And now me, the newest addition to this ancient being. I felt my body changing, transforming into something not quite human anymore. the pain of my divorce, the loneliness that had driven me into these woods. It all seemed distant now, unimportant in the face of this new existence. When I rose again to the surface, I was both Emma Carver and something else entirely. I could feel the lake all around me, inside me, its consciousness merging with mine. I understood now what Gerald had meant. I was becoming part of something greater, ancient and powerful. When I walked back to shore, water streaming from my clothes, I saw the world differently. Colors were more vivid, sounds sharper. I could feel the heartbeats of small animals in the surrounding forest, sense the slow, patient growth of the trees. Most remarkably, I could feel the other members of the collective: Gerald, Eliza, Daniel, and the others whose names I now knew without being told: Martha, Joseph, Rebecca, Samuel, Thomas, Elizabeth, and William. Their thoughts brushed against mine like gentle waves. "Welcome," Gerald said simply, extending his hand. I took it, noticing how similar our skin looked now. That same faint translucence, as if water flowed just beneath the surface. "How do you feel?" Eliza asked, her eyes reflecting moonlight in that strange, perfect way I now shared. "Complete," I answered truthfully. The emptiness that had haunted me since my divorce, no, if I was honest, long before that, was gone, filled by this new connection. Daniel smiled. "The first day is the most disorienting. It gets easier as you learn to balance your individual consciousness with the collective." The water creature, which I now knew was called the vessel, the physical manifestation of the lake's collective consciousness, had returned to the water, but I could still feel its presence, our presence, rippling beneath the surface. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you learn what it means to be one of us," Gerald explained. "The responsibilities, the abilities, the limitations." "Limitations?" "We are bound to the lake," Eliza said. "We can travel away from it for short periods, a few days at most, but we must always return. The further we go, the more we dry out." I understood immediately what she meant. Our bodies, now partly composed of the lake's water, needed regular contact with the source to maintain their integrity. "And the responsibilities?" "We protect the lake," Gerald said firmly, "from pollution, from exploitation, from those who would harm it without understanding what it is. And occasionally, we help find new chosen ones when the collective requires growth." I thought about the stone arrangements, the text message, the whispers that had led me here. "You helped the lake lure me in." Daniel nodded. "We recognize the signs. The lake chooses, but we facilitate." "What about my life?" I asked. "My job, my apartment, my friends?" "A necessary sacrifice," Gerald said, not unkindly. "Some of us maintain limited contact with the outside world, enough to protect our territory and ensure the lake remains undisturbed. But our primary existence is here, with each other and the lake." "People will look for me," I pointed out. "Perhaps briefly," Eliza agreed. "But the lake has ways of confusing investigations, redirecting searches. Your vehicle will be found at a different trailhead, with evidence suggesting you hiked in a completely different direction. A few personal items might be discovered miles from here. The authorities will eventually conclude you got lost, or had an accident, or simply wanted to disappear." The calculated nature of this plan should have disturbed me, but I found myself nodding in acceptance. My old life seemed increasingly distant, like a story I'd read about someone else. "Come," Gerald said. "There's a place for you at our settlement." The settlement turned out to be a collection of small cabins hidden in a dense thicket of trees about a quarter-mile from the lake's shore. The structures were simple but well built, with solar panels providing limited electricity and a central building that served as a communal gathering space. "This has been our home for generations," Gerald explained as he showed me to a small cabin that would now be mine. "We maintain a presence in the nearest town to handle necessary interactions with the outside world, but this is where we truly live." My cabin was sparsely furnished. A bed, a desk, a bookshelf filled with volumes on local history and natural phenomena. Through the single window, I could glimpse the lake's surface gleaming in the moonlight. "Rest now," Gerald advised. "The transformation takes a toll, even though you may not feel it yet. Tomorrow, we'll begin your instruction in earnest." Left alone, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened. I should have been terrified, grief-stricken at the loss of my humanity and former life. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace and belonging that I'd never experienced before. The lake's consciousness flowed through me like a gentle current, carrying fragments of thoughts and memories from the others in the collective. I closed my eyes, letting myself drift in this new mental landscape, exploring the boundaries of what I had become. Sleep, when it came, was deep and dreamless. I awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of birdsong. For a moment, I thought I was back in my apartment in Lawrence, that the entire experience had been a bizarre dream. Then I felt the lake's presence in my mind, a constant, gentle pressure that reminded me of what I now was. I was no longer just Emma Carver, 32-year-old ER nurse. I was part of Sutton Lake, one small consciousness in an ancient collective. I rose and found fresh clothing laid out on the desk. Simple, practical garments similar to what the Suttons had been wearing. My old clothes, still damp from my immersion in the lake, hung from a hook on the wall. I changed quickly and stepped outside. The settlement was busy with morning activities. Some residents tended a large vegetable garden behind the main building, while others carried water from a well or split firewood. Despite the primitive setting, there was an efficiency to their movements, a harmony that spoke of long practice. Daniel approached, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Coffee," he said, offering one to me. "Some modern conveniences are worth maintaining." I accepted gratefully, surprised by this touch of normalcy. "Thank you." "How are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully. "Different, but good. It's like I've been living in a tiny room all my life and suddenly the walls have fallen away." He nodded. "That's the collective consciousness. It takes time to get used to the mental space, to learn how to maintain your individual identity while still being part of the whole." "Is that difficult?" "It can be. Some chosen ones lose themselves entirely at first, become little more than extensions of the lake. Others resist too strongly and experience discomfort." "What happened to you?" I asked, sipping the surprisingly good coffee. "I was born into this," he replied. "My father is Gerald, my grandmother is Eliza. I've never known any other existence. Those who are born to the collective have an easier transition when they come of age and fully join with the lake." This was fascinating information. "So this community reproduces, has children?" "Rarely, but yes. The lake prefers to grow through choosing outsiders. It brings new perspectives, new experiences to the collective. But occasionally it permits births within the community." "And the children are normal? Human?" Daniel smiled slightly. "As normal as any of us. They're born human, yes, but with a natural affinity for the lake. When they reach maturity, usually around 18, they undergo the full transformation and join the collective consciousness." I struggled to imagine growing up in this isolated community, knowing that your destiny was to become part of an ancient water entity. "It's not as strange as it seems to you," Daniel said, responding to my unspoken thoughts with a precision that startled me. "Sorry, you were broadcasting. That happens with newcomers until they learn to control their connection to the collective." "You could hear what I was thinking?" "Not exactly. More like feeling the emotional shape of your thoughts. Specifics usually remain private unless you deliberately share them." I made a mental note to be more careful with my thoughts until I understood the boundaries better. "Come on," Daniel said, finishing his coffee. "My father wants to show you the extent of our territory." Gerald was waiting at the edge of the settlement, dressed for hiking with sturdy boots and a walking stick. "Good morning, Emma," he greeted me. "I trust you slept well?" "Very well," I confirmed. "Thank you for the cabin." "It's yours now. We're a family here, in more ways than one." The word family stirred mixed emotions in me. My own family was small and scattered. Parents retired to Florida. A sister in California I spoke to maybe twice a year. We weren't close. The idea of belonging to a tight-knit community was appealing, even if the circumstances were bizarre beyond imagining. Gerald led me along well-worn paths through the forest, pointing out landmarks and boundaries. The territory controlled by the Lakes Collective was larger than I'd imagined. Several square miles of woodland surrounding the lake itself, seamlessly blended into the larger Clinton State Park. "We maintain these lands," Gerald explained as we hiked. "Remove trash left by the occasional hiker who strays this far, discourage development or excessive tourism, ensure the water remains pure." "How do you discourage development?" I asked. "This is state park land, isn't it?" "Officially, yes, but we have arrangements with certain officials. Subtle influence. The lake has ways of making its wishes known." I wondered exactly what that meant, but decided not to press the issue yet. "And what about the choosing? How often does the lake bring someone new into the collective?" Gerald's pace slowed as he considered the question. "It varies. Sometimes decades pass between chosen ones. Other times, several might be called within a few years. The lake has its own reasons, its own timing. And everyone accepts? Like I did?" He gave me a sidelong glance. "Not everyone. Some fight harder, run faster, but the lake is patient. Those who are truly chosen always return eventually. And those who don't?" His expression darkened. "Those who resist too long begin to suffer. The calling becomes more painful, more desperate. Eventually, they either accept their fate or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Has anyone ever escaped?" I asked quietly. Gerald was silent for a long moment. "Once," he finally said. "About 40 years ago. A young man named Michael. He fought the calling harder than anyone I've ever seen. Somehow, he managed to break free of the lake's influence and escape." "What happened to him?" "The lake sent us after him," Gerald said, his voice flat. "We tracked him to a small town in Colorado. He'd started a new life there, had a wife, a child on the way. We were prepared to bring him back, by force if necessary." I waited, sensing there was more to the story. "But when we found him, he was wrong," Gerald continued. "His skin was desiccated, cracking, despite his drinking gallons of water daily. His mind was fracturing. The lake's partial transformation had begun in him, but without the connection to sustain it, he was literally drying up from the inside." "Did you bring him back?" Gerald shook his head. "There was no need. When he saw us, he knew. He came willingly, begging for relief from the torment. But it was too late. By the time we returned here, there wasn't enough of Michael left to join the collective properly. He dissolved when he entered the lake." The story chilled me despite the warm morning sun filtering through the trees. I had made the right choice in accepting the lake's call, it seemed. The alternative was too horrific to contemplate. We continued our tour, eventually circling back toward the settlement. As we walked, I became aware of a subtle shift in the collective consciousness at the edge of my mind. A ripple of excitement, anticipation. "What's happening?" I asked Gerald, who had also paused, head tilted as if listening to something. "The lake has sensed another," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. "So, soon after you. This is unusual." "Another chosen one? Who?" Gerald's eyes unfocused briefly as he communed with the collective. "A man, hiking alone, coming from the Eastern Trail. He'll reach the lake by nightfall." "And then what?" "Then we begin again. The stones, the whispers, the calling." I felt a strange twist of emotion. Sympathy for this unknown hiker, mixed with an unmistakable eagerness to welcome another into our collective. The lake's desires were becoming my own, I realized with a start. "Can I hesitated, then pressed on. "Can I help? With the new one?" Gerald smiled, pleased. "Yes. It's good that you want to participate. The more recently transformed often have the strongest connection to their humanity, which makes them effective at guiding newcomers through the transition." Back at the settlement, preparations were already underway. The collective moved with practiced efficiency, each member knowing their role without need for discussion. I was assigned to work with Eliza, learning how to place the stone arrangements that would mark the chosen one's path. "The stones serve as anchors for the lake's influence," Eliza explained as she showed me how to arrange them. "They focus its energy, making the chosen one more receptive to the calling." As sunset approached, we positioned ourselves around the lake, hidden but watchful. I could feel the newcomers' approach through the collective consciousness. A tall man in his mid-40s, hiking alone with a large backpack and camera equipment. A nature photographer, I gathered from the impressions flowing through the collective. I watched from behind a cluster of boulders as he emerged from the trees, his face lighting up at the sight of the lake bathed in golden evening light. He immediately unslung his camera, adjusting settings and taking shots from different angles. "Perfect," he murmured to himself. "Absolutely perfect." If only he knew what waited beneath that perfect surface. I felt a momentary pang of guilt, quickly washed away by the lake's gentle pressure in my mind. This was necessary. This was right. The lake had chosen him, just as it had chosen me. As darkness fell, the man set up his camp not far from where I had placed mine just days earlier. I watched him build a fire, prepare a simple meal, arrange his gear with the practiced movements of an experienced outdoorsman. When he finally retreated to his tent, Eliza touched my shoulder. "It's time," she whispered. "Are you ready?" I nodded, feeling the lake's anticipation building within me. Together, we moved silently toward the photographer's campsite, circling it at a distance, our footsteps deliberately audible. The first contact, the first hint that he was not alone in these woods. Inside the tent, the man grew still, listening. I could almost feel his spike of adrenaline, the quickening of his pulse. "Hello," he called out, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "Someone there?" We didn't answer, just continued our slow circuit of his camp. Then, as planned, we withdrew into the darkness, leaving him with nothing but questions and unease. The whispering would begin tonight. Subtle at first, easy to dismiss as wind or imagination. Tomorrow he would find the stone arrangements, experience the first equipment failures. By the third day, if he followed the pattern I had, he would be ready for the full revelation. As we walked back to the settlement under the star-filled sky, I realized how completely my perspective had shifted in just 2 days. I was no longer the terrified hiker being stalked by strange forces. Now I was one of those forces, helping to bring another into our fold. "Does it bother you?" Eliza asked, sensing my thoughts. "Less than it should," I admitted. "I feel like I should be horrified by what we're doing, but instead you understand the necessity," she finished for me. "The beauty of it. That's the lake's wisdom working through you." I wasn't sure if it was wisdom or something else, a subjugation of my humanity perhaps. But the overwhelming rightness of it was impossible to deny. The lake needed to grow, to incorporate new experiences, new perspectives, and in return, it offered something precious: belonging, purpose, near immortality. That night, lying in my cabin, I let my consciousness drift into deeper connection with the collective. I experienced fragments of memories from centuries past, Native American ceremonies at the lakeshore, early settlers discovering the strange properties of the water, the gradual formation of the Sutton family's pact with the entity that dwelled here. Most vividly, I experienced the memories of my fellow collective members. Gerald's childhood in the 1950s, fishing in the lake that was already part of him in some fundamental way. Eliza's coming-of-age ceremony in the 1930s, when she fully joined with the lake at 18. Daniel's modern experiences, occasionally venturing into Lawrence to maintain the community's tenuous connections with the outside world. They had lived such different lives from mine, yet now we were united, our experiences shared and preserved in the lake's consciousness. There was a profound comfort in that, knowing that nothing was truly lost, that every moment, every feeling, every realization would become part of something eternal. In the morning, I joined a small group heading to the photographer's campsite. He had gone hiking, his tent left behind along with non-essential gear. While he was absent, we made subtle alterations, moving items just enough to notice, placing one of the stone arrangements prominently beside his fire pit, tampering with his camera's battery. I felt his return before I saw him, a bright spark of awareness approaching through the forest. We retreated quickly, but not before I caught a glimpse of him. Tall and lean, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who spent much time outdoors. James Foster, the collective consciousness supplied. 47 years old, divorced, a professional nature photographer working on a book about hidden wilderness areas. He had come to Sutton Lake based on rumors from other hikers, seeking pristine shots untainted by human presence. How ironic that he had stumbled into one of the most intensely inhabited places in the forest, though not by conventionally human residents. Over the next 2 days, we repeated the pattern: subtle harassment during the night, stone arrangements during the day, gradual escalation of strange occurrences. James proved more resilient than I had been, more skeptical of the supernatural explanations that might account for his experiences. He methodically checked his equipment, searched for rational causes, even set up small cameras around his campsite to catch whoever was disturbing his camp at night. The cameras failed, of course. Electronics rarely functioned properly in the lake's presence once it had focused its attention on someone. On the third night, as planned, Gerald approached James's tent directly, inviting him to the lakeshore just as he had done with me. I watched from a distance as James emerged, clutching a hunting knife similar to the one I had brandished in my fear. "Who are you people?" he demanded, his voice carrying clearly across the still night air. "What do you want?" Gerald's response was too quiet for me to hear, but I felt the lake's surge of anticipation through the collective consciousness. The vessel was forming, rising from the water to make its first direct contact with James. Unlike me, James didn't approach the water willingly after the initial conversation. He retreated to his tent, packed his essential gear, and attempted to hike out in darkness, a dangerous choice but one driven by understandable fear. "He's running," Daniel reported, returning to where I waited with Eliza. "Father wants us to follow. Make sure he doesn't get too far." "He won't," Eliza said confidently. "The lake has him now. He'll find his way back to us no matter which direction he chooses." She was right, of course. After hours of hiking in what he believed was a straight line away from the lake, James emerged from the trees right back at the shoreline, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. I felt his desperation as a distant echo through the collective. The frantic checking of his compass, the consultation of his now useless GPS, the growing certainty that something impossible was happening to him. When he finally collapsed from exhaustion near dawn, we approached openly, no longer bothering with stealth. "It's time to stop running, James," I said, the first words I'd spoken directly to him. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes. "Who are you? What is this place?" "My name is Emma. I was like you, just a few days ago. Confused, afraid, trying to understand what was happening. You've been stalking me," he accused. "All of you. Moving things in my camp, leaving those weird stone piles." I nodded. "Yes, but not for the reasons you think." "Why then? What do you want from me?" "It's not what we want," Gerald said, "joining us. It's what the lake wants. It has chosen you, James, just as it chose Emma, and all of us before her." Chosen me for what? His voice cracked with exhaustion and fear. To join us, I said simply, to become part of something greater than yourself. I extended my hand to him, letting him see the subtle translucence of my skin in the growing light. I know how frightening this is. I felt the same way at first. But there's something wonderful waiting for you if you can find the courage to accept it. James stared at my outstretched hand, then at my face. I could see him taking in my altered appearance, the inhuman stillness with which we all moved, the strange reflection in our eyes. "What are you people?" he whispered. "We are the lake," we answered in unison, the collective speaking through us. "And soon you will be too." That evening, James Foster walked into the waters of Sutton Lake of his own accord, just as I had done. I felt his consciousness join the collective, his initial terror giving way to wonder, then acceptance, then the same profound sense of belonging that had overwhelmed me. When he emerged, he was one of us, his eyes reflecting the water's gleam, his mind linked to ours in the ancient consciousness of the lake. Months have passed since then. James adapted quickly to our way of life, his photographer's eye bringing new appreciation for the beauty of our domain. The lake has been quiet since his transformation, content with its 2 new additions, allowing us to settle into a peaceful routine. I rarely think of my old life now. The hospital, my apartment, even my failed marriage seem like distant dreams, stories that happened to someone else. My true life began when I walked into these woods and found Sutton Lake, or rather, when it found me. Sometimes I wonder about the hikers who pass nearby on the marked trails, oblivious to what dwells in this hidden corner of Clinton State Park. I wonder if any of them feel the lake's attention turning toward them, evaluating, considering. I wonder who will be called next. And I wait, patient as the water, for the cycle to begin again.